The January 25th, 2021 postponed to tonight meeting, regular school board meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everybody here. It's nice to see that we have so many interested patrons in what we're doing. We'll go ahead and do a quick roll call of the board. Go ahead. Cindy?
Cindy here. Yeah, Sarah here.
Eddie here.
Roger here. Jeremy's here.
William here.
Okay, everybody's accounted for. We'll go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll review the I-35 mission statement and district priorities. Our mission statement: the Interstate 35 Community School District exists to develop lifelong learners and responsible, productive, successful citizens in an ever-changing society. Our district priorities: number one, articulate and support a cohesive, student-centered pre-K through 12 vision for continuous school improvement. Number two, engage in effective teaching and relevant learning for the 21st century. And number three, operate with fiscal integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness. We'll go ahead and take a look at the agenda as it's been presented. Now's the time we'll discuss it and or approve. There's no discussion. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
We properly moved and seconded that we approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We'll go ahead and open public hearing at this point.
So we're having a public hearing on proposed changes to the 2020-21 school calendar. If you remember, we met in November and looked at a couple of reasons to modify our Fridays. At the time, we were kind of in a peak of COVID numbers increasing. We had seen quite a few kids being quarantined. And we just had a number of kids that were remote learning, and we wanted to kind of solidify what we were doing with some of those practices. So we recommended that on Fridays, we extend our virtual learning day to kids 5-8. We had originally had 9 through 12 in that model. And then move our elementary, our K-4, to a half a day of learning. So all kids are in person until noon. They get lunch, and then there's transportation to and from school. That has been the model that we've used for the last 2 months, December and January. And on looking at some of the most recent data, some of the things with our COVID numbers, but also feedback from teachers and from staff, we are recommending that continue. The recommendation is that we follow that calendar through the end of this school year. It is not presumed that any of this would carry over into next school year. That calendar has already been approved and adopted by the board. So to take any action beyond changing that would have to be another process like this. So this is only through the remainder of this school year, and obviously very specific to COVID concerns and reasons. So through the end of this school year, virtual learning Fridays for 5 through 12, K through 4 students from 8 until noon. On the Fridays, I think it should be noted, because I did have a couple of questions, any student can choose to come. So any student, whether they're asked to come by a teacher because of grades or because they want additional strategies or whatever the learning opportunity is, any student can choose to come. So they can either learn here or they can learn at home. So that's the option. But I just wanted to clarify that so people understood that you're not forced to stay home. You can come here and learn from that 8 to noon time, and we'll still provide transportation and lunch and all of that. So that's the recommendation that we're going to make tonight. So the public hearing is just comments on that. So
And what does the structure look like for 8 to, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What's the structure look like for 8, the 8 to 12, if I'm a high schooler or middle schooler that wants to come to school? Is it more of a classroom style or is it a study hall?
It's classroom style, or study hall. Sometimes there's extension activities. We have a couple of teachers, I think, that can address some of that more than I can. But there is a period schedule, and it's based on our core content unless you choose to go to a different content area. So let's say it's 8th grade. 8th grade language arts has everybody at 8:15. That's an 8th grader. And then at 9 they would go to math. And then at 10 they could go to social studies or science. So there are core content areas. But if you don't have something scheduled, let's say for the second block, you could choose to go to gifted and talented, or you could choose to go to PE, or you could choose a different option. So it's the 4 content areas that have the periods, and then if you're not booked for one of those, you can choose another option. Is that correct, Mr.?
Yeah, we use a program called FlexiSketch, and for 5th through 8th, actually 5th through 12th grade, teachers on Monday through Wednesday morning, that's when they go in and put in their student requests. Starting Wednesday morning at 9 until Thursday morning at 9:30, that's the student window, and students can go in and choose if they have open slots or if they know they're going to be at school. They can choose a teacher they know they need to work with. They also can choose a study hall option. And then at night, Thursday afternoon, we email the schedules out to all students who say they're going to be here on Friday.
Gotcha. Okay.
So is there a current cap on how many students can come in on Fridays from the middle school? So 8th graders, you have one section of math that they can come to. If 50 8th graders show up, I'm assuming it's a problem.
Right, we could, I mean, in theory, yes, but I think the conversation, and Steve, is Heather here as well? Yes.
I'm here.
I think the conversation is the teacher, so our math teaches 7th and 8th, so she would be booked for 2 periods. But if we had additional students, they could book her for another period, where so if she's booked for 8 o'clock for 7th grade and 9 o'clock for 8th grade, and we had additional students, then my assumption is she would have the 3rd period of that day and the 4th period of that day where we could do overflow if we needed to.
Absolutely.
Is that true?
Yeah,
Is that,
yeah. And
that's kind of how we talked about
the
it.
original schedule was set up the way it was, only because then we could ensure that if you're an 8th grade student and you need to see all 4 of your core classes, you know you can see math here, science here, social studies here, ELA here. But like Mrs. Stentlinger said, if I'm the math teacher in 7th and 8th grade, I only have 7th grade and 8th grade scheduled. The other 2, then I have open to support kids who maybe have questions about that Friday remote learning. And so there are kids who still are in their rooms during that time, and they could be a mix even of 7th and 8th grade. The original schedule just was set that way so that way we could ensure each kid could see every school teacher when they were here from that age.
All right, are there any comments or questions? If you could stand up and introduce yourself, please.
I'm Amy Jansen. I have 4 kids in the district. I have a 5th grader and 7th grader and 2 kindergartners. But my question is, so if right now she's not coming on Fridays unless she has to, but if she were to come on Fridays, is there instruction going on during those period times, or is she just asking questions about what was assigned for the day, or what's going on?
I would say it depends, mainly because there isn't set instruction for that time, but there are teachers who are giving interventions during that time, and that might be why they request these. So you might not be feeling, you might not have a need, but you still might get requests to come in because, like I know, for example, Mrs. Mager, she works with something called a CRE, and it's like a special way that you write about science. And so there are kids who are getting B's and C's and even A's in her class, but if they were struggling with that skill, she still asks if they come in on Friday. And then all the kids that need that skill are in the room and she can address that. So she probably was instructing, if that's what you're asking, but it was about a specific skill that some kids didn't have yet, and
not necessarily like teaching about the assignment that they were assigned for the day.
Right, unless she had specific questions about that, or maybe had missed that assignment and didn't turn it in, or those kind of things. But it's more, I would say the instruction that's happening is more either extension type stuff, or it's stuff that I know this group of kids is missing this day. I already taught it once in class, they didn't get it that time for whatever reason, and so let's try it again another week.
I do think it's important, just based on your question, to remind everybody that the remote learning 5 through 12 is an expectation on that day. So even if you come in to work, you're still expected to do whatever the remote learning is for that day. And I know a lot of times the teachers will go through that and ask, do you have questions about the assignments for today? But it's not like if they don't come, they don't have work to do. And I just want to clarify that because I think sometimes that might be confusing, like only half the kids have to come or whatever. So I just wanted to clarify that.
For my education, could you remind me why we initially went to the half days? I mean, I know, like, I might think that it's just for cleaning. I might just think just a list of that would be helpful.
Right. So at the time, we had extensive, I mean, our numbers in our county were going up. Thankfully, they're coming down. And so we wanted to make sure our janitors had time to do deep cleaning in the building when it wasn't as populated. So we could move kids and they could clean sections and do that deep cleaning. The additional thing was to work with our remote learners, to work with our kids who were kind of falling behind or didn't have all the skill sets. But then also it was to give our teachers the ability to plan effective remote learning and support remote learners and still support kids who were struggling. So it gave our teachers a 3-hour window. I think, in my opinion, and we can talk about this when we actually get to the discussion piece of it, and we have teachers here who can talk to it as well, I think. But I think the benefit, which we maybe didn't realize but came out of it, is obviously morale, home life balance, some of those things. So that wasn't necessarily the intent, but I think when it happened, it became something that we didn't realize how impactful it would be. So I would add that to the list now, even though that wasn't an original reason why we did it. So
Sorry, and I'm asking questions when the public should be asking questions.
That's okay.
So I apologize. Sorry.
I have a question. Whitney Stewart. I'm just wondering, is it public knowledge, like how many full-time remote learners are in the school? Like, is that something?
I can tell you, we have 57 currently.
Okay.
And then we have any number that are quarantined. I think we're at 21 this week.
Because I'm just wondering, like, compared, like, ratio-wise, it seems like we're changing a lot of stuff for a small amount, like a small amount of students, and you're affecting a lot of kids and parents that have to change a lot of things, their schedule, just a lot of things for just a small, portion of kids. I mean, just maybe that's more of a thought than, but.
No need to stand up again. So to follow up on her question, I have a question about remote learning because mine don't do anything but just the Friday. When they are full-time remote learning, do they learn with the rest of their class at the same time? Or are they receiving instruction at a different time? Like, how are they interacting with the teacher? I don't know that.
The easy answer is it depends. There are times when they may log in to the class, Google Meet or Zoom link, and they can join the class. Sometimes that's when they do group projects and they're interacting with their peers. There are other times when the teachers will post videos about the lesson for the day and they can watch it whenever it's convenient. So it's a combination of what we call asynchronous and synchronous, so meaning sometimes it's in person and not in person, but while the class is going on, and sometimes it's outside of when the class is going on and the information is provided for the students by the teachers. So it's a combination.
When I say they're on the same schedule, so whatever you're learning in
I'm Katie Monroe. I'm a first grader who, it's hard to get a lot out of a first grader, so I guess I'm just a little curious, what does instruction look like on Fridays for their half days with recess, lunch, that sort of thing? They're missing a lot of educational and social time, which I think is really important at that age. So I'm just curious what that half day looks like, as well as with the numbers reducing and everything, what is the reasoning of continuing the half days?
So I'll let Becky, do you want to talk a little bit about the kind of kindergarten, first grade, because she's the closest. Do we have a kindergarten or first grade teacher here? Okay, so Becky can kind of address how it looks.
What we're doing, it actually is a more focused with the core on Friday. In kindergarten, there's not a lot of, we're missing all that extra transition time because we're not going to a special, we're not going to an extra recess. It really gives us a lot more time to focus in on the critical stuff that they need to be learning. And it actually, to me, it's actually a better learning opportunity for my kids. We don't have to do center time. And I know what you're saying about social, and I totally get that. And that's important too, and I value that. And we do a lot of that within our lessons. There's a lot of think, pair, shares. There's a lot of engagement within the students to do those lessons. But I feel like I'm able to give more focus to the direct things that are the really important stuff. Math, reading, we do writing along with reading. And I know I'm not trying to push aside science and social studies, but some of that can be immersed into your lessons with your reading. So as far as for kindergarten, I can say our kids are not missing out on anything that is important. That extra recess time, the center time, you see what I'm saying? A lot of those times, and you've got to think about all the transition times that your kids have within a day going to all those other places. And that's just erased too. So it really is a much more focused learning that I think is really beneficial for the kids.
So they're in their classroom that whole time. They're not doing any specials. There's probably one recess maybe for first graders.
They're in the classroom. And our title teachers will still take their students, so they're still getting time with their students, that they're not neglected. And lunch, they still have their lunch, which is a social time. I mean, they're supposed to be eating, but trust me, they talk. Don't be surprised, parents, they talk. But I myself think it's such a great day to do that focus without all the other little fluffy stuff that tends to get tossed in there during the day. And I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that helps. Like I said, I don't get a lot of feedback from him.
Your son doesn't share any of that stuff. I'm sure your son shares everything with you.
So, Mr. Bertrand, if I could, what do you do in that half day? The day,
What do I do?
Yeah.
In the afternoon?
First half or the afternoon?
Oh, let's
Second
see.
half. You explained very nicely how you do it in the
Let
first.
me give you a rundown. So, I record lessons. Each of the kindergarten team members record a subject matter. So I have got 5 lessons for the next week. In kindergarten, we teach every lesson, full lesson, on the video. Our kids get the foundational skills. I can't just go in and say, go to this page and do this. I can't. It is building foundational reading skills. It's doing things with their writing to build writing skills. It's doing a lot of work with their math, where they see a lot of partner sharing. We're doing things where we have to throw some videos in. Yeah, let's do this fun video for Groundhog's Day. But then it's also planning the entire week. I have a remote learner. I get all his materials that he's going to need for the next week. I meet with my remote learner at least 30 minutes a week, and that time is absolutely amazing to be able to meet with him. Because I don't want my student to fall behind. I'm meeting with my team to plan all those lessons. We collaborate, and I'll be honest, I still stay late. I mean, I'm still here, I think the custodians just think I live here. But to me, those Fridays are a gift because I don't have to, take time away from my family. And for me, I am blessed because my kids are adults, but for all these other teachers that I work with that have young children, it is, I know how gotta be a struggle. And those Fridays are like being able to kind of get your head above water and feel as if now I can finally get my week planned for next week and go home and be with my kids and be a parent. So for the teachers that have young kids, I know this year is incredibly challenging for everybody, but I could only imagine what it's like for the teachers that are also parents. That, you know, on the remote days that we have, they are here, you know, like working if it's a half day or whatever, and then they're still going home and doing things with their kids. So if it's a professional development day and it's remote, they work during that day, and then they have to find time on the weekend to be teachers to their kids. So I guess, does that answer your question, Eddie?
Yeah,
I mean, and I'm being honest. I mean,
No, that's
I
what we
always
want.
do more than I'm supposed to, but this year it's like being a first-year teacher all over again, but more than I ever imagined. And this is my 25th year teaching kindergarten, and I'm still trying to tread water and keep my head above. So
No, that helps, thank you.
I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
Well, I just think we really saw when we had the 2 full remote learning days, if your students went online and watched all those videos their teachers had recorded, those weren't just for those 2 days. I mean, all those videos, you know, we have a kindergarten in our house now, and, you know, I'm watching all their videos and doing all the lessons with them, and they're doing those for every day, and so that the remote students get the same, or have the same lesson.
Yeah,
So
we
it's
don't
a
want
lot.
them to feel as if they're missing out. So it's like they're a part of the class doing it with us.
I'll go ahead and go. Kelsey Ritchie, I'm the parent of a first grader. I have 2 questions, but I'll start with one. My first one is you referenced data, and you also referenced students who are maybe falling behind in their option to come in on Fridays. Having done this for 2 months now, and basically the whole year, when you count some of the remote learning that we're doing, what data do you have that shows that the students who are already struggling aren't falling more behind with the half days that we've incorporated or the virtual days on the professional development days?
So I'll pull up middle school as an example, and Heather, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But and just let me get to it real quick so I'm not telling you the wrong information. The challenge, and I talked to the board about this, or some of the board members about this, is this year is a little unusual because we don't have a lot of set data points that we normally collect. So last year we didn't take the IUSAS test, which is the IO assessment that we typically give. We didn't do spring testing for FAST because we just weren't in school. And so those data points we don't have. So what we look at is what we do have. So we have grades. We have FAST testing for the fall and the winter last year, and now we have fall and winter this year, but we don't have spring. So we have holes in the information. So we're making do with what we have. So just as an example, I'll use the DF list at the middle school because I think that breaks it down pretty clearly. On 1019, we had the number of students on our restricted list, meaning they had a D or an F in a class, was 64. So between 5 through 8, I think we could count 5th and 6th, and then did we count just 7th and 8th? 5 through 8. We had 64 students. On 111, we had 30 students that had D's and F's. So we had reduced that number by more than half. If you look at our FAST testing as another point, since I referenced that, we have, the problem I think with this is this test or this suite of tests is not necessarily used to be a benchmark. It's a screener to look at skill development. So we know that, and so it's not always 100% what we want to say apples to apples. But if you look at the fall of 2019, our reading average was 60%. If you look at the fall of 2020, our reading average was 58%. And that varies by grade significantly for whatever reason. And then if you look at the winter of 2020, we were up to 66%, and this is number of kids proficient on whatever the assessment is that we used at that grade level. And at the winter of this year, it's 60%. So when you look at this and you look for trends, our growth is, I would say, probably a little slower, but it's on track for within a year from, I would say, now. So about 18 months is what we recommend for getting us back where we need to be and having kids on grade level. We're on track for that. But to say that we're where we want to be now, because kids missed 2 months of learning in the spring, I would say that's not accurate to compare those two numbers, because we didn't expect them to be there. So that's the kind of work we're trying to do with the data. Are we seeing growth? Yes. Are we seeing growth to catch up by the end of this year? Probably not, but we didn't expect to. Would we anticipate that growth being caught up by mid-year next year? Yes. And so other than that, in our DF list, those are really the data points that we have right now to use because of all of the things with the pandemic. So does that answer?
It does.
Okay.
Yes. My second question is regarding how the school district went about collecting feedback regarding continuing half days. Just curious on what that polling or sampling was like, not with just teachers, but also the community. Because just to state an opinion, in talking with my peers and other parents in the school district, I think that there's been some frustration and with short notice not able to attend the meeting tonight. So just curious about what that process was like, and if you could shed some light, that'd be helpful.
Sure. So I'll just talk from since I've been here, because I don't know what was done previously. Since I've been here, whenever we go to make a calendar recommendation change, it always has to have a public hearing. And so because this one is significant, I asked the principals to poll the teachers to find out effectiveness, because this is a huge decision. I mean, this is something that's impacting instructional time, but we're also talking about academic progress, so it's weighty. And so I didn't want to make a recommendation to the board without talking to teachers about the effectiveness. What were they gaining from it? What were the drawbacks to it? What would they like to see either different or better, or would they recommend that we not do it? So we had asked all the teachers, and our principals could probably talk to this more specifically by their grade levels, but I had asked because I wanted to find out if our teachers who are with kids every day saw a benefit. So that's where the teacher survey came from. I did not interview parents. We've never interviewed, since I've been here, we've never interviewed parents about calendar committee other than when it goes to the public hearing. So if that's something that we need to change, I don't mind looking at that, but that's just not been a practice we've done since I've been here. So I didn't interview parents. I didn't ask what their intake was. I did ask, so if a parent would contact me and say, well, here's my concern, then I would put that on our list to talk with at the principal meeting, but I didn't ever ask a blanket statement, what do parents think about this? Because that's not been our process before.
And Kelsey, I think it's a very good question, and I appreciate you bringing up your opinion. I do want to point out that last week was when this was supposed to be scheduled, and then we had a winter storm. Mm-hmm. And I asked Sharon, why don't we put the whole thing on Zoom? And she said, we're not doing the public hearing on Zoom. And so to your credit, Sharon, I very much appreciate that, because I'd have said, oh, it's another board meeting, let's just do it on Zoom. We're so used to electronically, so I do appreciate that. And then I think the other thing is that board members are always open to hearing the public's concerns, and we're not going to make 100% of the recommendations to suit everyone, but I would utilize your local board members to provide feedback and know that we are connected to the superintendent in the district, so that we can be that filter of information, if you will. So I know I've got a few parents that reached out to me. I think others have too, and I can say for the whole board, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but we do take parent considerations very much into my line of thought. And then I know if we want, maybe we could start polling parents to see, because, and again, you're here, right, Kelsey? That makes a big difference. So,
And I appreciate the answer, and your description makes perfect sense. I just think that as collectively, as we move into these strange, unprecedented times, that we might have, it might suit us to be creative with how we share information and the time that we set aside to make those decisions. But I understand that it hasn't been the way thus far.
thank you.
I don't have a question, but I just want to add to that. So I appreciate everybody explaining everything tonight, answering all of my questions. I came in here with an opinion, and some of those answers have changed my opinion, so I'm glad I came. So I think if you were going to involve parents, I think it's great that you have this. I think had I not come here, my opinion would still be the same. Like, some of the information, and I don't know how you would get it out to parents. Like the questions about how schedules work, and even with a 7th grader, you still don't get all the information. So, thank you, everybody, for answering questions. And I think that this helps. I know that not all parents can make it to all of these things, but I do think maybe information needs to be shared more with parents, but I don't have a solution for that.
But I would say that's very valuable for just sharing that, because you're right, there are ways that we could continue communicating out more information, and maybe even a little bit every week, so that, because some of it is if we say everything all at once, people aren't going to read it. But I do think you're right, a lot of those questions are probably valid questions that lots of people have, and so that's on me, like I need to communicate. No, but it is, like that's something we need to do a better job of now.
I've even called you to ask questions regarding Friday and stuff, but I mean, just hearing like that the little kids are getting more instruction on Fridays, like, and I totally understand doing remote learning with kindergartners and 2 of them. It's not fun at all, but
You do a lot of it. Like, I can vouch for that, but I am also telling you, it's like holding a child down to sit and watch them. I mean, I appreciate you doing it, but
I understand.
yeah. And then I think that, and I totally get, like, if I can get them to sit down in the morning and do, like, let's sit down for an hour and a half, get this all done, and then you can go do whatever you want to do. And I can go back to my desk and I can do my work. But if I don't get them in the morning, it's complete. So now I understand Fridays a little bit more. And I think my opinion changed a little. I think there's also this, like, I'm at home, I'm fortunate enough to be at home, so I can be there with them, but I'm also working, so there's those selfish reasons why being in school would be great. But from what I've heard tonight, it helps me a little more, gives me more, understanding of what's going on. Thank you.
Becky, can I ask for some clarification? You had mentioned earlier that you spend a significant amount of time of putting videos online for the remote learning, which is fantastic. But just for my clarification, is it because of the requirement of Schoology that you're spending so much time in uploading information? Is it all the details that you have to go through as part of remote learning to do that?
So are you asking more about the actual system?
Well, just the process itself.
The process of making the videos.
Oh, you want to know the process of making the video?
Well, I'm just trying to understand the effects of time.
Basically, we're using a brand new math program this year that I have never taught before. So it's a lot of prep work to figure out exactly how I need to put this together. Some lessons are pretty easy to teach. They're pretty straightforward if you know the program. You have to kind of think outside the box sometimes on how you're going to teach a lesson. Some of the lessons we have to actually collaborate and try to figure out how are we supposed to do this. Because some of it's not very straightforward. I've had lessons where I've actually had to have them watch my students doing the lesson so that they understand how it's supposed to be done, because you're supposed to be doing it with the students. Some lessons I can do and teach the concepts without the students being present. The idea is that we want the lessons to be on there at least 2 days in advance. So, for example, when we had the winter weather, we already had the lessons put on there, so I didn't have to scramble because they're already there. Sometimes I have to be creative and put some lessons with my students, who think they're on TV, by the way, and have to wave and, you know, ham it up with the camera. But that's kind of what it is. Like, I was recording for another day this week. I didn't get everything done on Friday. So I'm recording before I came here, and it took me 20 minutes to go, and I need to get this, I need to get that, I need to go get this, I need to get these materials, and then I have to read through it several times before I get on there to record, because I want to make sure I'm doing it correctly. I want there to be authenticity with how it's supposed to be done. So I don't want to get halfway through it and realize I missed this part, and this part, and this part, and oh gosh, now I have to do it all over. Sometimes the platform is not very kind, and others may be able to vouch for this.
Because have you had trouble?
Sometimes the Schoology will say, it'll go, do this, and say, we're sorry, but you have to do it again. It didn't record. And that's happened to me before. I had at one point, the platform didn't record my voice, and I have no idea why. And I went to get tech help and said, can you help me? We couldn't figure it out. It was just bizarre. But you have those sort of things that happen, so you don't know what to expect. You go in thinking, this will take me this amount of time, and it could take you this amount of time. And sometimes I think, oh, this is going to take forever, and it doesn't. But when you've got math, reading, writing, science and social studies, and then you also have to put in the assignments that go with it. I put in videos to go with it. In addition to what I'm teaching, there might be stories that I get to put in there. So it's just gathering all that up together. Does that answer your question, Cindy?
Yes, it does. I'm just trying to figure out, would your lesson plans be different if you were just doing a Zoom call?
Was it what?
I mean, if it was live,
Yes.
if they were gonna, like, if you were gonna.
We've had that conversation before, if they could do it live for a lot of this, which I would love. The only problem is, my remote learner also has a 5th grade, I think he's in 5th grade, and then a high school sibling who also need to use theirs to get on. He has a 1 tab, so he can't just get on that. That's just it doesn't need Wi-Fi, the 1 tab that they use. So if he were going to be watching something, I would have to do this whole choreographing thing with and I'm not even sure about their Wi-Fi at their house, how much they have.
So
to
how are
use
they
one of
able?
their Chromebooks to be able to log in to see me, if that makes sense.
So how are they able to consistently be on Schoology if you're not sure of their internet capability?
I think the question that she's answering is syncing times for kids to be on for a whole day and having multiple kids in a home most people don't have the bandwidth to do that.
Yeah.
So if I were gonna watch my lesson at 8 and my brother was gonna go on at 9, I could work on additional materials at 9. I wouldn't have to necessarily be online at that time. Because we've had that conversation about synchronous and asynchronous. Should a remote learning just be logging a kid in at the beginning of the day and then just letting the camera run for the day? And I think the whole administrative team says that would not be highly effective at all. And so the challenge is, how do you create a calendar to have synchronous and asynchronous learning when you have multiple grade levels trying to take advantage of it? And that's why the information is housed on Schoology in video form as well. So if they don't have the ability to sync at the same time as maybe the class is meeting, they can still go back and get the instruction for the day. Does that answer kind of what you were
Yeah,
asking?
yeah.
So, first of all, I appreciate all the time. I know that teachers are putting in a lot of time to do all these videos. I have a student watching them. But I guess this kind of follows up on Whitney's question earlier. For Mrs. Bertrand, having one remote student, having to do all of her lessons twice just doesn't seem like the best use of time. And I'm sure you guys have all discussed this a lot, so I'm just curious, have there been other solutions that have been discussed, like just recording her and posting that later, her live lesson? It just sounds like we have a lot of work that we're putting on them for a few students, and I understand that everybody has reasons for learning virtual, but I'm curious what other solutions have been discussed there to help alleviate some of that time off of the teachers.
Right, and I think that if we've heard about it in a different school, we've talked about it. A couple of reasons why I think our Return to Learn team, and there are several of them here, a couple of reasons why our Return to Learn team went with the model that we did is because we want our students to have a connection with their teacher. I know that there are districts around us that use a programmed class for the online piece. But the way that our plan is structured, a student could come back at any time. A student can leave, but a student can come back at any time, meaning, and I don't mean any day, but the set days that we have. So if they come back, or when they come back, for whatever reason, we want them to have a connection with the teachers that we have here because we think those relationships are really important. The other challenge that we have with that is at any given time, we could have 6 kids gone from her class because of quarantine. So those 2 weeks, we have to have some method by which we're still continuing instruction. So because we just have one remote learner, we have one remote learner that day, but tomorrow we could have 7 for 2 weeks. And then the next week we could have 5 different ones. And so we know that that's the reality of this year because of the way the quarantinings work. So that's why we also wanted to kind of keep it where we had that connection and we develop those relationships so that if you do come back, you know who your teacher is, but if you have to go, you know what the process is.
Right, and that makes sense.
Can I just add a little thing? I'm not an elementary teacher, but just from being in classrooms, I can say, maybe I'm off, so please tell me if I am misquoting, but if she videoed a math lesson, it would probably be way longer videoing her class lesson than when she kind of does it just for her remote learner. She makes it way more to the point. There aren't distractions. Nobody's asking to go to the bathroom. No, none of that stuff's happening. So when you talk about kind of having to like hold your kid down and make them watch a 15-minute video, if she just videoed herself teaching, that lesson probably takes 30 to 45 minutes. And so then asking a kid at home to just sit and watch all these other things happening, for me, and I was part of the Return to Learn team, I just don't know that that's super effective in terms of instructing our kids.
And I want to clarify one more thing. So Becky right now is videotaping math. She's videotaping math. Mrs. Hanson is in kindergarten, and she's videotaping the phonics piece, the foundation phonics, for the whole grade level. So we don't want you to think
That I'm doing the whole thing.
she's doing 5 lessons a
Because
day.
I never leave the school, I'd have to live here.
So the grade level teams have divvied out those jobs, and so each teacher is responsible for one subject. But then it's just that you have, if you have kids that are remote learning, you're still contacting them to
Yes.
see what they're returning
Yes.
and that kind of thing. So we don't want you to think she's videotaping every single lesson for every
I'm
student.
not.
She's doing all the math for kindergarten.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
that does, yeah. I'm glad you clarified that.
Do you do any recording live? I'm just wondering, like, is there value in seeing the other students' questions on some of these things, or just seeing who their fellow students are should they come back? Do you record any of it live and post those? I don't know that I've seen
Any of it
from my
live?
students.
We have not done it live.
Okay, I'm just curious. I haven't seen
And that
it.
was something, like I said, going back to what Sharon said, I haven't been fortunate enough with my students. The only thing that I've done live is doing Zoom meetings with my students when we have closure. But recording a lesson live, it's just been not, we haven't been able to work it out. And it's unfortunate. And I would if I could. I think he would enjoy it. My my remote learner. I will say that when he comes in, he'll say hi to Mrs. Hanson, and she's like, when he first started coming in to meet with me for his about 30 minutes a week, she's like, who is that little guy? He knew who all the other kindergarten teachers were because he saw them on videos. So he's developing a relationship through these videos that we do, and he knows who all the other staff members are on our team simply because he watches them in videos. So
I know this isn't a time for board questions, but I'm going to ask one anyway. So is there only one voluntary remote learner for kindergarten?
is there one what?
Voluntary remote
We
learner
have
for
a remote
kindergarten?
learner, but other kindergarten teachers that are there other
We started
kindergarten-
out with, I think it was 4 voluntary remote. Did you have one? We each had one. And that's all been bumped down to just me. We've had students move. We've had students that were choosing to be remote based on circumstances within their family.
And then we've had quarantine students.
Exactly, and we've had quarantine students. So we've had, I've had in my own classroom 3 quarantine students. I know that the other classrooms have had quite a few more than I've had. But it's been nice that they have that information so that when they come back, they know exactly what we've done. And anybody else can talk.
You know, and
I'm not the only one that
I should know this, but what's the current, I haven't had to quarantine a child since the beginning of the year. What's the current quarantine timeline?
It's a great question, but it depends.
Where's Brandy
So, if anybody in here is a health professional, and I'm not saying this right, you can correct me, but currently, if you are quarantined because you come into contact with someone, you can be out for 5 days, get tested. If it comes back negative, you can come back on day 7. If not, you don't get tested after day 5. You can't get tested before day 5 and come back, but after day 5, if you don't get tested, then you're out for the 10 days. Okay, so 2 weeks.
Thank you.
I have a question. Okay, you were comparing scores from, well, not last year, but 2019, I guess, in the fall, and then this past year. We all expected them to be lower, like everyone did, because they must, but don't we want to try everything that we can to get them back like on track faster? And I believe being in school with their teacher and like in front of them, for my kid, I don't for my child for sure it's night and day difference.
Right.
Like they learn way more in school. That they learn at home a lot of probably yelling and sit down and listen, so they get nothing out of it. But
And I do think, and I guess I want everyone to know that when we make this recommendation, we do not take this lightly at all, for the exact reasons that you're talking about. We have some kids that thrive in remote learning, we have some kids not at all. We have kids that thrive in our school and some kids not at all, right? So our goal is to try and figure out what the plan is for a whole district. I would say, and I would like the teachers to respond to this if they would, because again, I'm not in the classroom every day in that role. I would say that Fridays has allowed us to target kids who have greater deficiencies and work with them like we could never do before. Because when we request teachers, I can see Caitlin shaking her head, when teachers request students to come in, it's for a very targeted reason. They don't have this skill, they're missing this, and that's partly because of being gone. And so if I know that you've missed that, and I can call you in with 3 other people that have missed that, and we can target that instruction specifically to help you get there, I think we're going to see that growth in the manner that we want. But I do recognize that some kids, if we tell them you're going to learn remotely, it's not going to be as effective as the classroom. We know that without a doubt. but I'm making the recommendation because I think that what we're doing with those Fridays has a huge benefit as well. For kids to get them closer to that mark, maybe faster than if we continue to do it the way that we were. And does that answer? I mean, I understand what you're saying completely, and I don't want anybody to think that this was a decision like, oh yeah, let's just, because that wasn't it at all. But I do think that when I put the value on this, and I've talked to several board members, you know, I still go back and forth. Is this the best thing? And I don't know that there is a right answer right now. It's just what do we think is best and what are we seeing from our current data to help us make these decisions to try and get the whole district where we want to be. And that's tough. And we know that it's a big ask. We know it's a big ask what we're asking our teachers this year. We know it's a big ask what we're asking our parents this year. I think everybody in the world is kind of in that situation. But I make the recommendation because I think it serves us to be there where you're talking about, where kids have caught up, where we're on track. And that's one of the things that I think is challenging. And I'm just going to talk about it for a second, but the Return to Learn team, we were given research that says, how do you bring kids back from a disaster? So we looked at the research after Katrina and how schools kind of structured their days and what they did, or after a major event, wildfires, whatever. And so what the recommendations were and what we based our plan on is you want to teach kids at grade level. So instead of going back and teaching the 2 months that they missed, we brought kids in and started teaching them in August at grade level. So if you were a first grader, you came in and we were going to teach you at the second grade level. The challenge with that is we have to have the ability to work on those skills that we know that they're missing. And so this time allows us to do that more systematically and more targeted than what our day structured before, because we haven't had a need like that before. So that's based on that research, we created that plan for that reason. And this is just one of the tools that helps us to do that. And I think as teachers would attest, probably more effectively than we've been able to in our traditional schedule.
So you guys have talked like it's 5th through 12th, or they can come in and they can get specific help on stuff. What about these elementary kids? Yeah, they've shortened, and you guys do a lot of work. Like, I'm not trying to take, but what about the kids that need extra help? You know, they don't get a separate time, do they? To
Any child that had resource help gets the resource help on Friday. They get it before they go. So they're not losing their time with their support. If that's what your question is.
Yes, but then you also said that you scrunch the core classes in, which rightfully so, but that means that child is losing out on some of that, I'm assuming. When they're in their
Not
getting
necessarily.
help.
They're not. The time that they're normally taken out is such a short amount of time that because most of the students that go with Mrs. McKinney, their time is long enough to give them the support, but it's not like a 30-minute time that they're being pulled out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know how it works for students that go to another support class, but if they still have speech, they still get their speech. If they still have, they're still getting that support. I do know too that, and I understand exactly what you're saying, but in the big scheme of things, I just feel so blessed that we've been able to come face to face. There's so many schools out there that are doing hybrid and all this remote, and I'm just astonished at how these people are doing it, because I don't know how they can do it, but we've been so fortunate that we can, and that we're still doing it, because I really do think it's what's best for kids. And if I thought for 1 minute that I thought my kids weren't going to get what they need because of getting out early, I would not be supporting it. I would just bite the bullet and say, but I honestly feel like they're getting what they need. They're like my own kids when I have them, and if I thought that I wasn't doing the right thing for them, I wouldn't be supporting it. I would not be. If I didn't feel like we were still giving them what they need on Friday. Because to me, that's just not what's best for kids, but I feel like we're giving them what's best for them. And that's why I'm here. I wouldn't be here if I didn't feel that way.
Yeah, 'cause some of those kids are being pulled, they might be in a small group time anyway, so some are in a small group, and some are in a secret, but some are going to be for a little bit, or some of my grades that come first thing in the morning, they're coming before they even want to start. I mean, it's just, we always try to work it out, so they're not missing their core reading and math time. So I try to be creative and find ways to stick them in the end.
I think it would be worth us acknowledging the pros and cons. I had an interesting perspective a couple weeks ago because I got to be home for those 10 days. And so not only as a parent or as an administrator, but I saw it as a parent, the pros and cons of what that remote learning. And there's room for improvement. I think the first thing I came back and told Sharon, I said, well, I got to see things from the other side, and I wasn't here to go to somebody and say, hey, you need to adjust this or change this. But I do think it's the value for me from that perspective was, as a parent, I got to see how to help a kid navigate a class that was not laid out very well, or how to help a kid not need to help the other kid whose class was laid out really well. And that, as having an 8th grader and a 4th grader, it gave me a view from 2 different buildings and multiple classes. And so when we looked through all of those Schoology classes, it was really fairly easy, I think, for all of us administrators to see that we have some improving to do on our end as well for our teachers, and that's to provide some instruction on what is effective in those classes, because we've all seen it from the parent side, and we've certainly all seen it from the administrator side. But I do think it's important to acknowledge some are really good and some are not very good, and we have room to grow, especially from a parent standpoint, because there was times I didn't have to say anything, and there were times I did have to hold that kid down to say. But it partly was the way that things were laid out, the way that instructions were, and providing some of that clarification. So I think it's important for us to just recognize that there's still room to grow, whether it's a Friday or whether it's a virtual day of any sort that we're doing. But it truly is the right thing when it comes to supporting a kid. We can get better there as a district, and we're not quite where we need to be, but some are doing it pretty darn well. I think Becky's team is a great example of doing it really, really well. So appreciate her being here.
All right, are there any other questions or comments? I want to thank everybody for coming. Like Mr. Castor said, I've got an elementary kid and a high school kid at home. And I had a high school kid who's been out since November. And online learning has been a nightmare for him. It's just been tough. He's a good student, but so I understand the struggle on some of this stuff. So I do appreciate everybody coming in here and input. All right, with that, we will go ahead and close the public hearing at this time. All right, Ted, do we have any open forum slips?
I did not get any.
You want to just double check and make sure there aren't ones
Did anything going out that I didn't need to be aware of?
Thanks.
There are none.
Education Spotlight. Speaking
in their class or students. You guys can actually come in front of the screen and we can see and hear you a little better.
You guys can introduce yourselves to begin with. That'd be great.
Yep, that's fine. Just so you can come this way. You don't have to be. There's nothing on the screen, so you can stand in front of it.
Okay. So, start soon.
Yep, that'd be great.
Okay, so my name is Natalie Gibson, and for my English project, we did like we found a book that we were reading, and we basically did a project about it, like what the book was about. and I did the longest ride by Nicholas Sparks did those books. And she had said be creative with it, and basically, I'm an artist, like I love art, so when I hear creative, I go all out, and people did posters, but I wanted to make a cake, so I made a 4-layered cake. It didn't really look like it, but it's my first time making a cake, and I basically made it took 2 days, which we got the weekend, so I was really grateful for that. And it was like 2 layers of chocolate, 2 layers of vanilla, and it was really good. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say. Do you want to add to it?
It was delicious, I will say. We all ate it as a class. It was excellent. She wrote her quotes on there. It was really impressive. We met the standards with it and everything. So Natalie and Ryan also had an excellent poster that he made. So I'm going to show that.
Before they get too further, can you tell us kind of what the intent was behind the assignment and what standards you were working toward?
So there were 5 standards. I gave them a list. So it was quotes, themes, character analysis, a perspective outside of the United States, and I can't remember what the 5th one was off the top of my head. But a lot of students pulled quotes and did a lot of creative projects. So Ryan used photos from his nature photography to combined with his book that he chose, which was Fear by R.L. Stine, right? So students were able to choose their standard, and then once they chose their standard, they could be as creative as they wanted to meet that standard from Common Core. So they did an excellent job. I was very impressed. These are just 2 of the projects that they did, and I was blown away by the creativity. And then for my juniors and seniors, I had a fiction class. So Briley and Kelly are here to present their children's stories. So I had students create stories with the 7 elements of fiction. And then they shared those with elementary classes. So we just walked on down to the elementary and went ahead and shared those. So girls, you want to share those?
Yeah, so I'm Riley Alvarez and I'm a senior. And so we had to have a lesson or a theme behind it, and mine was just pretty basic, just friendship and having your friends back. And then we had to also include the 7 elements of fiction. But yeah, I'll just read mine. So mine is the piglet in the pup. The piglet found the most unlikely companion in a furry friend. They were the best of friends on the West End and shared a common fear of the would-be crow. They feared his shadow as the crow circled every day for an opportunity to snatch them up. The piglet would always defend the pup. The crow would dare not come at the fair. One day, when the pup sat in the chair, the crow swooped very low. But the piglet put on a show. This scared the crow back to the meadow. The piglet and the pup did a little dance, proud of their big stance. They went to the shoe drink from the trough. They smiled and let out a little stop. So like I presented to 4th graders, and at that time in their English class, they were learning rhyming, and so I tried to kind of rhyme.
So my book's called Alexander the Panda. Hello, my name is Alexandra, and I'm a Chinese panda. My fur is only white and black. I spend all day eating my snacks. In a tree is where I spend my time. I got up there by learning to climb. It's usually plants that I like to eat, but sometimes I like to have meat. My life isn't really that fun. I don't really do a ton. One time I told my friend a lie. I told him that I was able to fly. My friend the fox thought I was cool, but after I lied, I felt like a fool. I hadn't realized what I had done. I felt like a loser in a race I hadn't won. I told Fox that I had told a lie, and this made him break down and cry. I'm sorry that I lied to you, Fox. I didn't want you to think I was as boring as rocks.
Oh, Alexandra, I don't think that you're a bore. I just wish you wouldn't lie anymore. I still want to be your best friend. I want us to be friends till the end. Oh, Fox, that makes me so glad. I'm sorry that I made you feel sad. Now come on, let's go have fun. I won't tell another lie, not even one. So like Riley said, they were 4th graders. We read to the same class. We read to Miss Pickard's class. And like she said, they were learning about rhyming, but for their kind of science side, they were also learning about animals and nature and how, you know, they kind of come together. So I kind of chose to put both of those elements in there. And my background theme was like lying and how you shouldn't lie to your friends or anyone. So that was my background theme.
Yeah, it's been awesome to be a first-year teacher at Interstate 35, so I'm really excited to be here, and the kids are great, the staff is great, the parents are really supportive, so I've been really blessed to be here for this crazy year. So.
She has other adjectives, but she's not.
She's on camera.
I just had a question for Riley and Kelly. What was the reaction from the 4th graders?
Honestly, nothing. Like they kind of just sat there and watched us read and yeah.
I feel like mine probably wasn't. It was probably more for kindergartners than 4th graders, so they're probably just like, "What is this?"
Yeah. They'll figure it out someday when they have to do projects.
Yeah. They know the response of a silent classroom now.
Yeah.
You need to ask direct questions to
Yeah.
certain kids, right? Pick
Well, how did you guys feel after you went down there and read it? I mean, did you feel good about it, or what?
I mean, I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, my son's in Miss Pickard's class. He's gonna get an earful tonight. I can't engage you guys on those stories. I don't know how he's ever gonna learn. Those are awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Good job.
And I know both your parents, so I'm sure that they helped you very much on that.
I definitely read it over to my parents.
You should definitely read that to your moms and dads if you haven't, because I mean, my kids don't share anything with me, so this is very nice. Maybe I shouldn't, but anything you can share with your parents, I think they'd love it, for everybody.
Thank you guys for
Very
coming
good.
in.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good night.
Next time we'll try
Good job.
the cake.
Yeah. It won't take as long the second time.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Will, you're up.
All right. So far for the second semester, not much has happened. The NHS and Student Council have some projects they're working on for events and stuff like that, so looking forward to that. There's no more of I know in the students there's a lot of deliberate rule breaking so they could get sent home because they don't want to be here. But for the most part, that is not present anymore. Everyone understands that it's serious and stuff like that, so there's been an end to that. All in all, we've had a clean transition into the second semester, and I think we're going to do well. That's all I have.
Did we got any questions for Will? Well, I appreciate you coming and changing your schedule based on us postponing the meeting.
No problem.
And I would like to thank you for your service at this point. I understand you had some news that you care to share?
Yes. So a couple weeks ago, I officially sworn in and enlisted into the Army National Guard.
Good for you.
Very good.
Congratulations.
That's great.
Thank you.
Congratulations. All right, on that note, we're going to move on to the principals.
I get to follow that up. I'm way too old, and I appreciate Will signing up. So kind of like Will had talked about, start of the second semester. Today was an interesting day for us because we pull grades every Monday, and I think we take advantage sometimes for how well technology works when it's working well. And when days like today happen with Schoology and how Power School and Schoology, which are two programs you've heard a bunch about, don't talk to each other well, that makes life in the grading world really challenging. So I'm thankful today for Julie Kordick and Priscilla Boswell, because they ran around and tried to put out fires and help teachers all day today with all of the things that was going on. I don't know that we're out of the woods yet with it, but sometimes it's that world of technology. So we'll continue to follow up with that tomorrow. But it just created, those things happen. So it creates a backup, and we have to step back and say we're going to work through it. So we'll finish up the grading stuff hopefully tomorrow, because this is our 2.5-week mark for the semester. So it is an eligibility time for us for kids that can come off our eligibility list. No new kids go on at this point. So just trying to get the kinks worked out, and that was common for us at the beginning of first semester as we were trying to work through some of this. So I think we're wondering a little bit from the Schoology or Power School end if that's because of the transition of semester or if it's some of the grade book setup. But again, we're working through that, and we got great supports to help us through. Winter sports are winding down for us. We've got basketball teams are both within a couple weeks of their postseason. Wrestling is within a couple weeks of their postseason, and then we'll start to transition into our spring activities. I know robotics has been working on their stuff after school as well, so I consider them kind of a spring activity, but they do overlap into the winter also. Along the same lines of grading, our English department is off and running in their implementation of standards-based grading. That's again part of the grading conversation we had today, is how do we take a look at those grades and where kids are and the progress they are or are not making in the English world. So again, one of those challenges of implementing something new or a new practice is just working through the kinks and the challenges that you find along the way. But overall, I think it's been a good start to that implementation practice. I know we have PD coming up for the whole staff on February 12th that will begin to dive deeper into assessments and some of the components that go along with standards-based grading.
And we do have Mrs. Duttry here. Is she still here?
Yeah.
So I don't have her on the list, but if you don't mind, I'd like her to give you an update on what's happening in the middle school.
Absolutely.
Since she is here.
Sure. So a lot of the same things that Mr. Patrick was talking about, because we're in the secondary building together. But also I would add that I met with Julie Kordick recently so that we can start adding some more stuff to our website for the middle school specifically. There's a lot of great things happening. And even like on those Fridays, when some of the questions they were asking, some of the things that they're doing on Fridays are beyond just our regular core stuff. A lot of extension type activities that are happening. For example, one of them that I was super excited about, maybe just because it included food, but Mrs. Gellner's a 5th grade teacher, and she's talking about the rainforest right now in her reading curriculum. And so she, not during her 2 support blocks for kids who maybe needed extra help, but during one of her other open times, she offered an extension activity, and they made like the ants on the log, which is like the celery and peanut butter and raisins. And so it was something like just to give kids another perspective thinking about what they're learning about in class. So I do think our middle school teachers are really taking advantage of that time to build relationships with kids and just do some cool activities with kids that they might not otherwise fit in as they're trying to kind of continue to accelerate their learning. Last time I talked a little bit about our building role with literacy. And so actually just this last week, they gave the 2nd written retail assessment. So hopefully next month I'll have some more data for you about how that 2nd assessment went and if some of the instructional strategies that we're implementing, if they're making a difference. I know that they're making a difference for sure, because a lot of our FAST data, it's not, everybody isn't completely finished, but we're seeing some really great growth in reading, especially our 8th grade. Heather Wells, our interventionist, she told me she didn't know that she'd ever seen a score as high as our 8th grade fluency reading was right now. So I think there's a lot of promising things happening with that literacy work that they're doing as a middle school team. I think that's it.
Okay. Any questions from the
All right. At the elementary, we just passed the 100-day mark, which, as you know, in the elementary is a pretty big deal. A lot of neat things going on. If you walk around through our halls, you see a lot of decorations celebrating that 100th day. And again, with so many schools in the state that are still either fully remote or hybrid, to celebrate 100 days of in-person learning is a pretty big deal. Thanks to the PTO for doing a lot of the activities and donuts and decorations that they've been doing. They're currently doing the food drive that's based around a 100-day program. If every class can donate 100 items, they earn a popsicle party, and I believe pizza parties for the classes that donate the most. If you walk around our lobby, you'll see all the boxes. The amount of stuff that I've seen pouring in the last week is pretty amazing, and I know that's going to go a long ways for our food programs. I mean, several of the classes are well up into well above 100 already. Some I've seen are over 200 items. We're swimming in stockpiles of boxes of cans and ramen noodles to feed small armies. So we've got some neat things going on around that. Preschool registration comes up the evening of the 23rd. So that's coming up as we look at next year already. It's hard to believe we're at that point of the year that we're starting, 2020 was such a mess, and now we're going to be looking at 21-22 school year already. So that's coming up. Hopefully we have some good numbers in that, because that'll determine some shuffling around of classes and lots of stuff that come around with that, those numbers that'll come in from that. Fast data has been mentioned a few times. We do have some of our results coming in. I think we're still collecting some of our spring stuff is still our winter still being tallied to be put into the spreadsheet. As expected, we've seen some low spots in the fall, but we're seeing growth from fall to winter. So that's good news. When you look at year over year, from winter of 20 to winter of 21, we have some areas where we're ahead, some areas we're a little behind, and so we'll look to see what's causing that and do some digging in and seeing if we can get some of those areas to recover. And then finally, spring play. We're going to have a spring play again. So mark your calendars, April 2nd and 3rd. We will be having a comedy play that's in email, and announcements just went out today for kids to sign up for that. Found a script that was social distancing friendly. Only I think 2 people on the stage at a time, but it's a really interesting, creative script, so make sure to mark your calendars for that. Hopefully have a good size crowd that can come watch that. So other than that, we survived our move into third quarter, and report cards would have gone out last week, and it's hard to believe we're already on that second half of the year, but here we are. So
I just have one question.
Mm-hmm.
You said with the food pantry stuff, that's going to either local programs, or is it staying here with what Mrs. Boyd?
I believe it'll go through our food pantry and
great.
Backpacks for Hungry.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you. Superintendent report.
Yeah, so I just put 2 things on here for the report. I wanted to give everyone an update on the trophy cases. That's something that we've talked about before. Our facilities committee has talked about it. We do have someone local that is creating a design for us. We got some feedback from our facilities committee about where logistically it can make sense to house it. But we also wanted the possibility of expanding, and how could we do that? We thought using somebody local would be the best option, so we're going to get a bid. Once that design comes in, I of course had the people who know, meaning the secretaries, give me feedback on what the design could or should look like. So they took 3 or 4 or 5 different kinds and said, we like this, and we like this, and we like this. So once we get that design, I'll bring it in when we make the recommendation for that. So I just wanted people to know that that is something we're working on, and I think it's hard sometimes to realize that we still are doing other things during the year besides just dealing with the pandemic, which is, I think, a good, like the play, I think is phenomenal that we'll be able to do that. So I just wanted to give an update on that. And then I also wanted to update, and Eddie, you can talk at any time during this, about our insurance committee work. If you remember, this was a group that was put together last year to really kind of think about where we want to be long-term with our insurance and what we offer and how it supports the district and how it supports our staff. And we went through a process of prioritizing things last year and really kind of looking at how do we want to put ourselves in a position to give our staff what they want and deserve, and also still make sure that we're doing right by the district and trying to balance that. And so we met about 2 weeks ago, and the conversation, we do not have our rate back yet. I think we get that back here in the next couple of weeks. But we talked about what's going well based on our changes. We did make a couple of changes. We went from, I think, 5 plans to 2. Ted, am I saying that right? We had one that nobody ever heard of, and then we, or 4 to 3, I don't remember what our...
We're down to 2 though.
We're down to 2. Just putting ourselves in a position to be thinking long-term. So the conversations are generally rich. A lot of it is, well, what happens if this, and how can we make sure this? And I think that the biggest fear anytime we're talking about insurance is that for so long, insurance was a negotiated item, and our staff negotiated great insurance. And so now that it's not a negotiated item, there's a concern that that's going to go away. I think they're realistic in understanding that insurance prices continue to rise, and that's probably always going to be the case. So how do we balance that? What does that look like? And so we talked a little bit about this the last time. Do you have anything else you want to?
I think you summed it up nicely, but we're really, in order to do this, we're just trying to understand the plan benefits, understand what the employees value, and then kind of optimize the outcome to what, and align ourselves with what the insurance company is doing. And so I don't think there's a whole lot of friction points, and it seems like we can get there, and I think we're going to make it in a better place, and we're going to increase awareness and understanding of the plan benefits. So if there are changes, this committee can go out and get feedback and then bring it back in so that we're taking all constituents into consideration. So I think it's great. I found that it's a very beneficial community.
Well, don't tell them that, because they'll all want to be on it.
Well, no, you guys can all be on it. It's awesome. It's awesome.
We do it at a time.
Yeah, we'll do it at a time. Well, so there's still room for one.
I'll defer.
Okay, well, happy to provide that update then.
Sharon, is there an update on the signs?
Oh, yeah, to the extent that they're at the company that's going to install them for us.
Still?
Yes. There's only one, I mean, we have this company in Des Moines, and the next closest is in Kansas City. So if that gives you any indication of how much work this company does and where they go. And I don't know, the weather probably has some factor in that now, but I know that Rick has contacted them several times. So I will follow up and get you guys more information in March. But
And this is for the sign up front.
the outdoor signage and that's what you're talking about?
Yeah. So what were the signs that we saw in the CTE building?
That's what it is. So they have to, so, and I know nothing about this, I'm learning as I go, but they have to take the lettering and they actually make a template that they can put on the wall so they know the exact spacing for the signs. So if you imagine the letters for the east side on the very top part, I think are 20 inches tall. So they have to, and it says Interstate 35 Community Schools. So they have to create a template that they can put on that surface so that when they go to mount it, they're all spaced accordingly. So they have to do that with all of the different locations. Now I'm not excusing it, but I didn't even know they had to do that. So that's the process they're in now, is creating those templates.
But they sent us the actual signs ahead of time. Then.
Yes, we got those before.
Right,
yes.
okay.
Yes.
I think they have all the letters now.
They might have all the letters now to make those templates.
And their template is for the, sorry, I was eating as well. The template was for the holes that they drill into the wall. So it's, whether they actually mount it to that template or not, I don't the way I took it from Rick is that they set this up there because they don't want Steve up there with a hammer drill and one ours this way and one ours this way.
Or
Not that I'm getting up there.
or having some letters turned around.
They'll send their people, but they want to make sure everything looks right before they get it up there. That's at least what I took it as well. They're creating a jig.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
You mentioned trophy case, you mentioned designs and a location. Is there a defined location that you can share with us?
Yeah, well, as far as we know, yes. They're going to be on the south and north sides of the doors to the high school office. So I think that's where they were before, if I look at the flooring. And then the record boards are going to be on the south side of the athletic hallway. And then we have the option of kind of clearing the space to the east and west of our janitorial closet to add more. So we talked about those kind of as you're in there and coming in that main door. And we talked about using steel elements because that's kind of the structure of that new space. Rick really didn't want any wood on the bottom because of the cleaning the floors. So I anticipate, I talked to the person who's designing them, and he's going to have some sketches for us, and then I anticipate sending them to the facilities committee for feedback, and if everybody's kind of on board, I'll bring it to the board with cost. And so those are the spaces we have right now.
Any other questions for Sharon? Thank you very much. All right, we'll discuss and/or approve consent agenda items at this point. Everybody should have received the past monthly meeting minutes and our monthly bills and financial statements. And then we did have an open enrollment consideration.
Do you think that open enrollment will stay next year as well? If we offer, or we're not going to offer remote, or?
That's a great question.
Because I mean,
you know, I've asked around the state, different people, like public health, different superintendents, and there is no consensus on what next year is going to look like to start. None. And that worries me a little bit, but so I don't know, in all honesty. I don't know if we're going to have to make that a consideration. I don't know. I assume that if we have kids that are testing positive, they're still going to have to quarantine. I don't think that just because people are getting vaccinated, that's not a recommendation right now for kids. We're seeing more kids testing positive. So I anticipate we'll have to follow the same guidelines that we have now, which then to me necessitates considering that as an option of remote learning. But I honestly, I don't know that I can say right now that that would be something. I think if we did it, it would be a little easier because we already have a year of remote learning recorded in there, and so it's a matter of modifying it. But I don't feel comfortable right now saying if I think we're going to offer that.
I ask only because you can see the next Arizona, whatever, through these online schools for colleges, you could see an Iowa accredited high school do that and do it really well. And guess what? You got all the virtual learners funneling to one system.
Yeah.
And rather than doing one, we're doing 20 or 30. I mean, you can't do 30 at a time.
And we have 2 high schools right now that have online academies.
Yeah.
Where our kids go currently. But now that we have the option here, they don't necessarily go there, they stay here.
Yeah. Anyway, that's for next year.
And I think it's a relevant conversation because if we're talking about kids going and us paying open enrollment into CAM, which is one of the online academies, versus us having it here, as long as we're able to do a good job and it makes sense with our staffing, I don't know that we would dismiss it because I think it's something we have to look at. But to say that we're going to do it because of necessity, because of health concerns, I don't know.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
All right, we would need a motion second and a second to approve or deal with the consent agenda items.
I move to approve the consent agenda items.
Second that motion.
Been properly moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda items. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Computer? Are you gonna, you wanna project?
Oh, I guess I wasn't planning to.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
So I guess that's our way of saying you're up.
Yeah, sorry. I thought before you get going, I thought, oh, I maybe was supposed to set that up and I didn't even ask.
Yeah, I guess,
School website.
I guess maybe I should ask, maybe has everybody gone out and looked at the new website yet?
That have an app too.
You get it?
Yeah.
And I hope you all have the app too.
Yeah.
As of this morning, we've had 140 of the Android apps downloaded and 318 of the Apple apps, where we have a total of 458 downloads of our app. Comments I've gotten from people have been very positive about the app. I've heard from kids and parents and staff. It's so much easier to it's so much easier and faster to update and put things out. Keegan's been doing a great job. I kind of got him showed a week or so ago, and now he's posting everywhere, to the live feed, to Twitter, to Facebook. So we're getting. I feel like
You can get me to figure it out.
Yeah.
You're doing things.
And like as far as our social media, we started a Twitter account this year. We currently have 98 followers on it. We started an Instagram account. We have 207 followers on it. I think thanks to all the high school and middle school students. Facebook, I tried to find out how we were a year ago, but I couldn't get. But currently we have 1,808 followers on our Facebook page. And I was kind of looking today, we have them from our top followers are from St. Charles, and it's followed by New Virginia, and then it's followed by Truro. But then we have people out of state, we have people in Des Moines, Marshall. I mean, we kind of broke it down. So we have a lot of followers. Just on the last for us Facebook, our last 28 days, we've reached 7,347 people. We've had 4,597 people engage with us. That means they're clicking on a link. There's pictures. They're opening the pictures up and looking at them. In the last 28 days, we've had 22 new people like our pages are following us. And I've had. I think staff is getting better and providing me information what's going on, so I can get more of the good stuff out there that we're doing. I think one of the things as far as there's still a few tweaks I need to do to the website. I don't have any of the analytics for the website. I need to set up our Google Analytics so I can start looking and seeing, which pages are getting the clicks and things like that. So there's still some stuff to do on the website, but it's out there, and so far the comments have been very positive. So questions?
Yeah, I got a quick question.
Okay.
As far as the social media, I mean, those are great numbers, and I love the way everything's getting consolidated. How are we doing in consolidating all of the interstate communication into one social media, so everything's pointing towards one, so we don't have all these one-offs?
We've had that conversation
Just last week.
Before I started doing all the social media, I have a list of all the social media accounts, and some of it they have not been active for quite a while. There's some of them, and I can't do anything about them because I'm not the owner of them, and some of them I'm not sure who the owner is. And I think, other than the sports team, I think wrestling's probably the most active one. But we've kind of talked more, and I've had other people ask me too. I've had a couple of organizations ask me, and I said we'd really rather try to keep everything going through the school. especially for those prospective people who are looking at our school, people who are thinking about moving down in the area, they're going to come look at the school first. So we really want them to come to the school website, the school Facebook or social media account, and be able to go from there to see the things that's happening in the school.
Our challenge with some of the one-offs
Mhm.
is that they're not school sponsored. So it could be a group of parents that have created a website and just call it I-35X. And so we have no control over it,
Like little roadrunners.
possibly. I don't even know all of them, but yes.
Well, on Twitter,
So
there's 5 of them.
yeah, so the
There's
challenge is that
wrestling,
that's,
National Honor Society,
Right.
golf.
Right.
You know.
right. So the challenge is that even though they have our name on them, we don't control the content. Not that control is the right word, but it doesn't filter through anything. We don't approve, we don't even know what is being posted sometimes. And so that's a challenge. But then we have to balance, okay, so they serve a purpose in getting information out a lot of times if there's practice or if there's, this event's coming up or whatever. But on the flip side of that, how would we even begin to monitor or start those kinds of conversations, and is it necessary? So that we will come back to that when we were just trying to dig into how many were out there, and if we could find out who.
How many did you come up with?
I think there's over 20 on the list she gave me.
Yeah, and that was just for Facebook.
Well,
Yeah.
if they're run by district employees, it should be pretty easy to get.
But they're not always run by district
Right,
employees.
but that's the low-hanging fruit, right?
Correct.
Or
Correct.
they also, the employee is no longer here. And so it's
Right.
kind of like a dead account, but you go out and look at it, well, it was the last updated 2016. And so how can we,
Yeah.
But don't those platforms have rules about using other people's name and likeness? So they don't. I could start a Twitter account that says Roger Canoy's official.
Yes, you could.
Absolutely.
Yes, you could.
You can.
A good example would be the
So
President of
maybe
the
I am
United
on
States. There's
Facebook and I don't
probably
know
4 or
it.
5 different ones. that
You
think
will be
we
tonight.
Sorry, Jeremy, I was talking.
No, you're fine.
What were you saying?
I know that they do it all the time. I mean, if you want to put misinformation out there, it's one way to do it. But I counted up and I sent Sharon my list to Facebook and I found like over 20.
yeah, I think that's,
And they weren't all school related, I got that. And some of them hadn't been used since 2016, so, yeah, no.
Well, even the ones we can clean up, I think we should, so that we have the central messaging location.
Yeah.
and that's one thing with our website and app now. Like I've got Keegan set up, and so he can go out and post. When he posts, he can post to the district Facebook and the district live feed, and he can post to the high school or middle school. And we can do, I'd like to see us doing more of that. I know Mrs. Dutry has talked about, okay, she wants to be able to go out and post stuff to the middle school. And she said, should I set my own account? I'm like, no. So when they come and ask me first, it's a pretty easy answer. But her and I are kind of working together about, and then I can start, I guess I'm giving up some of my control slowly here. And trying to get other people, and like the coaches should be able to get on and post. And then we can set it up with different authority, we can set up so, like, we could even have students post, and we could set them up, well, somebody has to approve it before it goes out. So there's different levels of authority to post out that we could probably explore more too.
And that was one of the goals I think we had, was to be able to control the brand of Interstate 35. And the website looks awesome, the app is good, you're continuing to grow. It looks like there's a bunch of more features that can kind of pile onto there. I think it's exciting. I'm really glad we spent the money on it.
Yeah.
For sure.
I appreciate everyone's support of it. I know sometimes when you branch out and do something new, especially like that, I really appreciate the support the board had of it.
I'm glad to hear that you're happy with it, that it was as easy. I mean, to get it set up, it's a short amount of time, honestly.
Well, and I know Mr. Tessa, so when we had the days that we closed, he took care of notifying the TV, radios, and sending the email and text. I got on the app. I just typed in one message. I sent it to Facebook, Twitter, their live feed. The app notification went out on the app, and it took me probably only 2 or 3 minutes.
And she was faster than me, and then there was people on Facebook, aren't they sending out texts anymore? I got it on the app, but I haven't got the text yet. I'm working on it, people.
Well, and I think Amy I think if I'm reading my notes right, Amy Jansen brought up how do we communicate more effectively with our parents and getting things out. And obviously, this is crucial to that. So thank you for the execution.
Well, you're welcome. And even like, I know with the app, you go down and click on the news. Sharon put something out today about kind of the COVID and some stuff about the legislation, you know. You go on the app and click on the news, you'll be able to see those articles and information there.
Yeah, they're really slick. I'm sure they're sharing a couple of times right across there with them, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, early retirement. We had 4 early retirement applications put in, and we're gonna need a motion and a second to accept the early retirement applications. We had, and these are people who all qualified for early retirement.
Correct.
Got their information in on time. Jenny Jones, Julie Kordick, Dennis Meggers, and Ronnie Freeman. Those are institutional names here, so I don't know that I want to approve any of them, so.
You just reject them?
I will tell you that you actually can.
We can, I understand that.
You stayed for this part.
I kind of control right now the social media. I was taking pictures.
I apologize, Ms. Corey. I was doing that for your benefit, to be honest with you. No, we do need a motion and a second to take action on these 4 applications.
I'll move to accept the early retirement on the 4 applications listed.
I'll second that.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the 4 applications on early retirement. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. It's a done deal.
So last year, if I can just say something really quickly, typically we honor our early retirees in May. Well, that didn't happen last year. I mean, we mentioned them at the board, which was unfortunate, but I think that it is important. I always, you know, when Julie called me and we talked through her desire to retire, and I got done crying. I think it's always really, really important to talk about what our retirees mean to our culture. And when you're talking about going into a school, and granted, this is my 3rd year here, but there's a culture of commitment to kids, to programs, and every single one of these teachers exemplifies that. And that you don't get just when you hire a new teacher. I mean, you like to build that, right? But you don't get it right away. And I would say for all the administrators, and they can speak to it too, but we really do wish you well. Right, I mean, because I'm always so excited because I'd like to think maybe one day I'll get there. But I just think that you can't speak enough to the impact that at least these 4 individuals have on our culture and our kids, and how many lives they've impacted for the better, and just what a difference they make in the community and the world at large. When you talk about our social media expanding across the country, it's because our kids are moving and living different places, but they're leaving with values and work ethics and things that are really, really important, and it's because of these kinds of teachers. And if we don't have school in May, I just want to make sure that you guys all know that, because it's truly appreciated, and it makes our jobs a whole lot easier when we have really high quality staff. So thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to say too, it has nothing to do with the pandemic. I've known for the last 3 to 4 years, this is the year I'm going to retire. We got it all planned out. And I've really enjoyed, this has been a challenging year, but it's been a good year. And I want to leave when I'm feeling good and knowing that we're doing good things here. I want to leave on that high note too.
You know, Tom Brady's going back to the Super Bowl this year, so maybe if you come back for the Super Bowl. If you decide not to retire, it could be good next year too. I I'm just kidding, but yeah, thank you. And I looked down these names, I don't know how many years of service they've had on average, but I think we're over 100 years with these 4 people.
Oh, yeah.
Over 100 years,
Yeah.
20 kids per class, you start doing the
At high school,
math.
you're talking about 120
Yeah,
kids
it could
per
be
class.
Right, and how many
Yeah.
people how many lives you've impacted over those years, and it can get huge pretty quickly, and it doesn't show up on paper, but it shows up through the lives you affect, so, thank you.
Thank you. It's very kind of you.
Does anybody else have any comments?
Thank you. All right, final reading of the 200 series board policy. This requires a motion and second to approve the final reading of the board policy series 200. We revise our board policies every 5 years, and there's a rotation for the board policies, and this year we are revising the 200 series. Don't need to read through it.
You read through them the first time, nothing's changed, it's the
Okay.
same. We just have to do it 3 times in case
Yep.
there's anybody that has something they'd like to, public can give feedback or.
Right.
I'll move to approve the final reading of the board policy series 200.
I'll second that.
It's properly moved or seconded that we approve the final reading of the board policy series 200. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes. That puts us to the second reading of board policy 502.12. This does require a motion and a second to approve the second reading of board policy series 502.12.
I'll make a motion to approve the second reading of board policy 502.12.
I'll second that.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the second reading of board policy series 502.12. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, legislative priorities.
You want to start with that one, or?
Is there one before that?
Nope, no, I know that we had talked
Yeah.
about putting this on here.
Yeah, I think I had talked to Sharon about putting this on here just because with some of the movement we've seen at the State House, it's important that we understand what our priorities, what we've established as our priorities as a board are, and what some of the ramifications of what we're seeing can be. So,
I think obviously I'll just give kind of an overview of some of the major movement. We had a bill passed last week that requires an in-person learning option for all parents. The struggle I have with some of this is, and I'm going to speak from my personal opinion here, so take that for what it's worth. Some of the legislation that we're seeing proposed is reactionary to the way that schools have tried to deal with the pandemic, I think. Some of it's been on the agenda for a while, and I think they're just trying to get momentum. But, this in-person learning, while I understand, at the beginning of the school year, every district was charged with getting kids to school safely and getting kids to a learning environment safely, whether that was remote, whether that was hybrid, or whether that was in person. And districts were charged with coming up with plans, and our team spent hours developing our plans so we could do that effectively. And not every district, I think, probably gave it the time that it needed. I think that there was still a lot of questions when school started, and I think that some schools have different limitations on how they can meet the public health guidelines that we're expected to meet and get kids in school in a safe manner. So the challenge is and I've told, I think, several of you this, I've talked to administrators in other buildings who have been in in-person learning for 3 days through the whole year. Not even a hybrid, but 3 days of in-person learning, the rest has been remote because of high numbers, because of not being able to social distance, for whatever reasons. There have just been some really, I think it's extreme cases, and I think it's frustrating for parents, for teachers, for administrators, because kids want to be in school. That's what they want to do. So I think, like the 100-day option, the 100% in-person option, while good, I think it's reactionary to the way some people passed or worked out their plans. Because I think some schools are doing it right, and they don't have necessarily 100 days, maybe, or 100% in person. They might have 95% in person or 45% in person or whatever the number is, but they could have it structured. So that one is already passed. It's already been signed. We do allow students to come to our building 100% of the time. We have since we started, so that doesn't really impact us so much. Some of the other changes are open enrollment, changing deadlines for open enrollment, which really does, I think, cause some challenges. There's an omnibus bill that's being debated that includes several things that I think will have significant ramifications on public education for the next 20 years. And for our district where we're located, it could impact us just because we are close enough to the metro that it wouldn't be unreasonable for people to commute if they wanted to. And so some of the changes that they're recommending could impact us financially as far as number of students enrolled, but also some of the other things like all of us, the whole state being on the same student information system, which doesn't mean a whole lot. We get to choose between one of 3 right now, but the proposal is that the state would pay for the first year out of CARES money, and then the districts would have to pick up the cost every year after, which we pay for it now anyway. But to transition from a student information system to another one, it's not just the cost of getting the product, it's the months it takes to get the data moved. And so some of those things, while ours works effectively for what we need, if we have to switch, because now we're on a statewide system, that's going to cost us a lot in man hours. It's going to be a whole new learning curve for registration. I mean, there's lots of things that could go into that. We have no idea if they would pick the one that we already used. That'd be handy, but it could be one of any of the 3, I would anticipate. Or I'm sure they'll call for bids and they might pick one that we haven't even looked at before. So that's a concern. There's concerns about open enrollment and not having to sit out 90 days for sports. They're talking about taking that off the table. They're talking about allowing school buses to go in other districts and pick kids up that are open enrolled, which is another big concern. So there's just a lot on the table. School vouchers, we haven't even talked about that. Using public money to pay for private schooling, while, all of those things will impact us, whether we agree with them or not, right? They're all going to have an impact on how the public school structure is shaped over the next several years. So I guess I would open it up to if you have questions about any of them. I can tell you what I know. If you have opinions and you haven't contacted your representatives, I encourage you to do that. But the landscape could change significantly if some of these bills pass. And so when we talk about building relationships and having connections with our kids, that's going to be huge. And I think we do a very good job of that here. But it's what sells your school. It's why people continue to come here. So we have to make sure we always remember that.
So will the Wayne have to restructure how they're offering
Yes.
classes as well? And will they take it up in the legal court?
I would imagine. Yeah. Because you're supposed to follow the health guidelines, yet now you're being told you have to have 100% learning option. Now that doesn't mean every kid has to come back to 100%. You have the option of doing it.
Yeah. And our proposed calendar change would allow that because we allow that option. Any kid can always come.
Correct.
No matter what.
Correct.
We said that, but
yeah.
And where do you draw that line of kids just coming into your school and we don't know what they're doing versus instruction?
Well,
what does full-time mean in the way it's written down?
100% in-person learning means that if the school calendar is structured to be from 8 to 3 on Monday through Thursday, I'll use ours as an example, and then from 8 to noon on Friday, then online 100%, or in-person 100% is all of those hours. So we couldn't tell a group of kids, you can't be here on Tuesday, but you can be here on Thursday. But if our calendar reads that we have an early out, like in this case, if we dismiss at noon, then students being able to be here until noon is 100% in-person learning. So that it doesn't take away. So a lot of school districts have asked that very question because so many districts have tried to find workarounds, finding time for teachers to get that collaboration so they could do the remote learning piece. So I think Southeast Warren dismisses at 12:15 on Wednesdays. So we're recommending that for Fridays, but it doesn't change unless you're throwing it in and it's not part of the calendar. If it's on the calendar, then it counts as what your number of days are or your number of hours. We're doing days, but it could count for the number of hours.
But there's no requirements of, the legislation calls it full-time in-person instruction.
100% in person.
Yeah, it says full-time in person.
Yep.
But that full-time in person doesn't mean they have to be instructed, they just have to be here. Is that accurate? So like we look at what our middle school and high school kids, they have the option of coming half a day.
Right.
But they aren't.
So their instruction is remote. So they're still expected to do that day of learning remotely or here. So the instruction happens remotely. So there's still a day of learning going on, but on those Fridays it's remote, but they can do that physically here.
Okay.
Now, if we said, if you are struggling and you want to come in on Fridays, but we're not having instruction for everybody else, then that's not 100%.
And is that interpretation, where is that coming from?
Right now from our advocates, from the people who are interpreting the laws.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll get more clarification on that, but because I asked that specific question because I knew we were going to be talking about the calendar, but they're saying as long as you have the option available for kids to be physically in the building for learning, and we will, because they can come in and they can work on whatever the instruction is for that day physically in the building, then it meets the requirements.
And since we measure by day and not by hour.
Correct.
Any time that they're in the building constitutes.
As long as they're working with a certified teacher.
And I think that's the part that's a little bit concerning to me because it does state full-time in-person instruction. And a lot of our stuff is you come here and you can do your remote learning. That isn't.
But it's instructed by a full. But it's being done by a certified teacher.
Right.
That's just one of the nuances that.
I think that's going to be a tough sell for our parents, honestly.
But that's
why it's a tough sell for me.
Sure.
That we're meeting this guideline. I'm not going to argue with our advocates, and there's lawyers at home a lot smarter than me. It's just this is what I think a lot of our parents are expecting and interpreting from the bill that was passed.
I take the 100% in-person instruction as being 100% in school, being instructed by a teacher in front of you. That's how I took that part of it. So it's up for interpretation, obviously. I had a question on, has the athletics, whether it's a union or association, with this new legislation of 100% in person, have they come out and said anything as far as whether schools are compliant or in compliance with it or not in compliance based on their remote learning model right now, or how they are going to adjust to it? So if you've got a school...
Yeah, I think it's got to be really clear that you have to offer the 100% in-person instruction.
Okay.
Parents don't have to choose it. they can still choose to be hybrid, they can still choose to be remote. So, you know, when we started, we had talked about, we want to know, are you going to be in person or are you going to be remote?
Right.
And those were kind of the two options we gave families.
Right.
Schools, if they have three options, if they have 100% in person, they have 100% online, or they have a hybrid, a parent can choose. They just have to make that 100% in person now an option.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean every kid has to be in school 100% of the time. Parents have to have the choice to choose that. So as far as athletics goes and some of those things, it just depends on parent choice and what the school offers. So if they're offering remote at 100% and parents have chosen that, then those students are considered in attendance and participating, and they can be in sports.
As long as that school gives that option.
Correct, as long as they're offering that. Because we don't offer, I mean, we're proposing kind of a hybrid model now, in the sense that we want to use Fridays, but with a shortened day for the purposes of meeting some of the needs from the pandemic. But it's not, I wouldn't call it a hybrid like we've seen in other schools where they go Monday and Tuesday for some groups and Thursday and Friday for other groups and have Wednesdays off. I mean, it's not to that
That would be one
level.
of my questions, is what's the difference between what we're doing and what's considered a hybrid? Because in my mind, we are hybrid.
Yeah, if we do the Fridays, I would say we have some elements of hybrid, but because we have students still able to come into the building and work with teachers, then that according to our advocates, that qualifies as the 100% option. Now, if we said only these kids could come in on Fridays and we didn't open it up to everybody, then we couldn't do that. But because we open it up to everybody, they say it qualifies. Now that, again, Roger, as you said, that could change with interpretation by different lawyers for different reasons, and I'm sure it will, but that's kind of how we're being told to interpret it now.
When you say advocates, who is that?
So right now it's Margaret Buckton with RSAI and
Our
ISPAS.
lobbyists.
Yes, our lobbyists.
Have we checked with our lawyer?
They are working through it right now.
Gotcha.
Because it just was passed and schools are scrambling to figure it out.
And so the schools that are hybrid are gonna have to go, they're gonna have to change their model approach, right?
They're going to have to give another option. They don't necessarily have to change, but they have to provide another option.
And that will take away the synergies of doing a hybrid model, right? I mean,
In theory, yes.
The whole reason you do the hybrid model
Yes.
is to
Reduce numbers in classes.
reduce numbers,
Yes.
have teachers focus,
Correct.
I think we've been, to the credit of the administration here, but I think we've been very deliberate from day one on how we've gone about the calendar, how we've gone about making sure that the kids were able to be in the building. You know, I've got a sibling whose kids haven't been in the building, all year, and he's asked me, how are you guys doing it? It's just, it's a lot of planning, and it's a lot of execution on those plans, and as we saw tonight at the hearing, those decisions impact families, and it's not the same across the board. It's what it looks like in my house doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to look the same in your house or your house. And so we have to do the best we can here, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness on it. I appreciate the administration's thoughtfulness on it. So, and if anybody had the chance, Margaret was on the news the other day talking about some of these changes, and she's got her finger on the pulse pretty good on what's going on in the State House.
No doubt.
And so I think we need to at least listen to what she's saying. So, are there any questions on the legislative initiatives or priorities? Thank you for going through this, Sharon. All right, then we'll move on to the school calendar. This will require a motion second and a vote to approve the recommended changes to the current academic calendar.
Is this where the board gets to ask questions?
This is where we get to have our discussion.
Yeah, you guys can.
So, I go back to, we started just the high schoolers, then we moved it to middle school. And I think that's where my kids have the most trouble focusing, is at the middle school. And now that I knew they could always come back, but after hearing that, you might want to staff up, because my kids might be coming back. Because quite frankly, I got a couple of kids. Louis is just, I mean, he's floundering at home. On Fridays, I struggle to get him going and going and going. And so, but could you explain why we included the middle school on that? Went from just high school to middle, just high school.
Right. So I think the first reason was the cleaning.
Yeah.
To be able to
And
have
to decrease numbers.
Decrease numbers. But I think the second number, or the second reason, was to allow teachers to be more effective in the remote learning. We had several questions, I would say, over the last 4 months, 5 months, about some inconsistencies and what some of the expectations were. And so one of the things that's really, I think, hard for people to understand, because I don't think we talk about it enough, is that we're asking teachers to be in-person learners and then take on the job of being remote instructors as well. Now, I think our team did a fairly good job of trying to break it up, so Becky Bertrand doesn't have to remote learn all of her subject areas. She just does one that they share, right? So I think we've really tried to be deliberate, but trying to make contact with those students and build those relationships, it was a big reason why we wanted to have that accessibility on our 5 through 8. The other thing, and then allow the time in the afternoon for teachers to have that collaboration and planning to execute that. I think the other thing that is important is we are under a system. Our differentiated accountability system requires that we have an MTSS structure. And I would ask Steve, probably more than any of the other administrators, he could share kind of how that process has floundered, if that's the best word, trying to find a time and an effective way to do that. So, meaning providing supports for kids who are struggling in content areas.
So MTSS.
Yeah, let's talk English for us.
Multi-tiered system of support.
Multi-tiered system of
So
support.
if you are struggling, what's the tier 1 system? So what supports are you getting in the classroom? The tier 2 is, how are we being what they call targeted, meaning we're providing an intervention to kids for 40 minutes in a given week to help them develop skill deficits or to work through content or whatever it is. Sometimes it's organization, sometimes it's behavior, whatever it is that might be impeding their academic progress. And then a tier 3 intervention is one that happens every day. It's about 40 minutes each day, and that's for our kids who struggle the most. They're not necessarily in special ed, which they have their own individual plan, but they're students that we want to try and catch before they would have to go to special ed. So our structure, our state bases our reading implementation based on MTSS. They look at our math implementation and talk about MTSS. Our whole system of accountability, which used to be our site visits, is based on MTSS. Well, that structure, and Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about that? That structure is very hard to do in a 7 or an 8 period day when kids are scheduled in classes all of those periods. So
can I just summarize what you said before Steve confuses me even more? So what you just said is it differentiated accountability, and then that basically means that everybody's different. We all have a plan, and everybody's plan is different. And you can't focus on Jeremy's needs, my needs, but business world is all about commoditization. We're going to streamline things, and we're going to make things less complex. This just made it really complex because we all have different needs, and it's trying to. And in the format currently, we don't have ever time to take on Jeremy's reading need and Roger's math need and my language arts need and.
Correct.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
Do you want to talk just a little bit about the structure of that?
Sure, and the way I think of that, Eddie, is you've got 80% of your kids are going to get your general instruction that you give Monday through Friday or Monday through Thursday, and they're probably not going to ask any questions. They're going to do the task you ask, they understand. You have 10% that are going to say, well, I can apply this to this, this, and this. And those are likely your tag kids that are the upper tier. And then you have a 10% of kids who need those supports that are going to be in addition to may not even be necessarily special ed kids. It might just be kids who have a little struggle reading or applying some sort of new math concept. And I would agree with Sharon, we don't have anything set up in a traditional 7 or 8 period day that allows for that support for those kids, which is where either the flexibility of the Fridays or flexibility for that first hour in the morning does come into play. So that's how I kind of keep that in mind when it comes to MTSS. As far as the structure of what has worked and what has not worked, I think floundered is a good term there, because there are things that we have tried to do to support our kids in a number of different ways. Study tables in the morning that are open in the library, using our NHS kids to come in and support or provide help. But really, I think we could all agree that the best instruction comes from the teachers, and really when it comes to supporting those kids. Part of the floundering has been because we don't quite understand what that looks like to create small groups based on skills. So some of that comes back down to how do we interpret data? How do we take a list of scores from a unit test and know that, okay, here are the things that we need to help student A with, here are the things that we need to help these 6 students with. I really think our standards-based work that we're getting set to do will help with that, because then we're going to be intentionally targeting what our assessments are based on our standards. So we're going to have some more common driven data there within our classes. And then ultimately, how do we provide those supports? So what the BAT team has done this year is we've been working, and I wasn't at the last meeting due to being gone, but I know that tomorrow we're talking about processes, right? Within that BAT team, we're going to come together and we're going to talk about how do we identify students, how are we creating a plan, what is the best plan for that student, and who's responsible for follow-up and follow-through with that plan. And so that again is just another level of that support system, so that it doesn't look as though, so if Eddie struggles on a test, he's not just Steve's problem because I'm the one who volunteered to talk with you because I've got a good relationship. Really, that support comes from the classroom teacher and how some of their instruction is adjusting or changing, as well as the supports that they're providing to that kid on a Friday. Because the idea is to close that instructional gap or that achievement gap. And if we don't ever provide some additional supports to the kid outside of the regular instructional day, we're never going to close the gap. The gap stays steady.
So how does this relate to a temporary change in the calendar? This is a problem you have ongoing. It's not because of a pandemic, correct?
Yep.
So how does this MTSS relate to why we need to continue the calendar change that's in front of us right now?
I'll address that. When we designed our calendar that you approved in August, we had talked about having that collaboration time at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, depending on what the structure was. So some of our teachers have that 7:45 to 8:45 time at the beginning of the day, and some have it at the end of the day. What we've realized is we have kids coming in during that time for this kind of instruction, which no teacher is going to turn away. The problem is then they don't have time to collaborate and plan for not only the daily lessons that they teach, but the remote lessons that we're asking them to do on top of that. So Fridays in the morning allows us to be more targeted, hopefully to catch up because of the issues that we're seeing with the pandemic. But the afternoons is about having the time to collaborate, because as I see it, I would imagine the building leadership teams, because we've talked about this, will recommend that we continue to have that study hall common at the beginning of the day for kids, or at the end of the day, whatever they come back with, whenever it would happen, and kids not being required to be here. It's open campus, kind of like what we have now. That time in the future, 3 days could be MTSS time, 2 days could be collaboration time to meet our hours that we have to have by Iowa code. The 3-hour recommendation for the rest of this year is because we know we have to up the game a little bit with our remote learning. And so to have those expectations be met, we need to give teachers time to do it. And I think that we've always said that our plan is built on finding out what's working, finding out what's not, and adjusting accordingly. And to me, this is an adjustment because we are seeing some differences in how that remote learning is happening. And while I know it's only 57% or 57 students that are learning at home right now by choice, we have, in the last 2 weeks, 40 different kids quarantined. And that number can range up to 100 or down, you know, I mean, and we don't know what that number is going to look like depending on outside contact. So we know we have to have remote learning for the rest of the year. We know that we have to pick up our game on some of our remote learning that we offer. And in order to do that, we know we need to give teachers time to do that to be effective. Because as I talked to Roger about this today, part of my job is to advocate for students and their needs. And I think by us being in person since the beginning of the school year, and by us putting this return to learning plan that we deliberated on for hours in place was the best step for our kids. I also believe that my job is to advocate for the teachers and make sure they're being supported in what we're asking them to do. And this is an anomaly, we know that. But right now, what we're asking them to do is requiring more time than what they have in any given school week. And I don't think it's fair to ask them to give more than that on top of what they normally do, to say, yep, we know we need to have remote learning, and we want it to be really good, but we're not going to give you any extra to do it. So the MTSS is a bonus, you know, for our structure this year that helps us with some of those bigger deficits. So that, I mean, and I mean, if we can keep that structure where we have the hour in the morning, 3 days a week, that gets us to our tier 2s, and our tier 3s, we schedule them specifically out of class. We've never had that common time for a tier 2 because somebody's covering a study hall here or somebody's got a study hall there, but this common time is huge. Now, it's not being structured that way this year because of the pandemic and the remote learning and some of the contacts. We have teachers that's when they contact the remote learners at home. We have teachers that's when they have questions that they answer. That we have teachers that's when they video. We have teachers that's when they pull their small groups. So having that flexibility to get teachers what they need, I think this year more so than any other, is imperative. And I don't think it's a detriment to what we have our kids doing so that they can get caught up over the course of the next 16 or 18 months. I wouldn't make the recommendation if I thought it was going to harm our kids or if I thought it was going to be a detriment to our teachers.
You can see how parents of those 80% might get the perception that the kids are only going to school half the time. And
Yes.
don't understand about the 20% that we're trying to adjust the schedule for. Because my kid doesn't get to school until 9 o'clock. Well, he's still same. Didn't do anything productive from 7 to 9. And then he gets off on Fridays and he does his homework, but he gets it done fairly quickly. So, you know, that's I think we're starting to hear feedback, you know, rightly so. And I feel it as a parent too. And so, what do you think is the biggest risk to doing something, to recommending this calendar? And us
The biggest
approving it?
risk?
Yeah, the
This
biggest
kid's not
risk.
being in the classroom.
Yeah.
I mean, by far, that's the biggest risk. If we don't do it, I think the biggest risk is creating an environment for teachers that's not healthy and them not being as effective when they are in the classroom.
Right.
I mean, I think there's the flip side of that, is that if they're not able to function at a high level because they've got, you know, they have no downtime, you know, you kind of go back and forth.
Right.
So, you know, one of the things when you look at the data that we've got from teachers that I was really impressed with, and I think our administrators would say this as well, but the one thing that stood out was the amount of time that our teachers can now build relationships with kids that they didn't have before. Because I guarantee you, if you three are coming in to work with me, we're talking about other things than just what's happening in school. And so if I can build that connect with you, that speaks volumes for the rest of your career when you're with me. A high school teacher, that could be 4 years. That's significant. And this year especially, that's crucial. And so I think that's Any other data from the administrators who looked at theirs? Keegan?
Just on that point about building the relationships, and I know it's just another small number of students, but special ed wise, we have some students who are remote learning who, whether it be because of their disability or not, might not have that opportunity to speak with or work with those teachers one-on-one, or might not feel comfortable going up to a teacher one-on-one. But with this opportunity, we've seen so much growth in some of our special ed kids, because now they're in there just with one or two other students instead of a big class where they might have some anxiety because of their learning disabilities to speak up or build that relationship with that teacher. So that was one thing that stood out to me whenever I did the survey with the special ed team, was just building those relationships, and then with those relationships comes the growth of the with the academic side. So that's been huge with the special ed side, especially with remote learners who are already 2 grade levels behind when it comes to academics, and then we add a pandemic on top of it, and then we add that they're not in person for multiple reasons. But just giving that time on Fridays for them has been super helpful.
And I respect what you're saying, Keegan, and everything that you've said too, Sharon. It certainly is all valid. It really is. But I guess my question goes back to, wouldn't this be the time to consider adjustments? We're the big concern with is the what was that? The MTSS? Is it multiple tiered? Yes, thank you. So with my thought is, you've got COVID numbers being more manageable as opposed to the beginning of the school year. We've got a smaller number of kids that are remote as opposed to the rest of the student population. I feel like it goes towards efficiency and being able to compromise on both sides, not only for teachers but for parents and students, and those that are in school already. So my thought is, could we consider different options, making some adjustments, like say forming like a core group of remote learning teachers, those that may be more technologically savvy, advanced, or enthusiastic about doing remote learning, and have that core group of teachers be the go-to folks for that purpose. Because you've got such a smaller remote learning group, maybe incorporate some Zoom. I know we talked before, you said Zoom isn't going to work for every single class and throughout the day, but for some classes, does it work where you can still do Zoom and have Schoology for some of the other classes? I mean, we've got, for example, an algebra class, and I'm not meaning to pick on anybody whatsoever. It's just a personal experience example of algebra's, it's complex. And if you're teaching new information, it's hard to just put that online on Schoology and expect a student to learn by themselves. So then wouldn't that be an opportunity to do a virtual learning, a Zoom moment? And just make that temporary for like a 1 or 2 day period for those types of classes. I'm just talking about consider different variations to make it work, so that we're not just continuing this calendar of the way it is. I mean, I feel like it's a one size fits all approach.
So can I ask a question on that, Cindy?
Go right ahead.
So, sticking with algebra, if those kids have the opportunity to come in on Fridays to get the instruction from the teacher that they're not getting if they're at home, then I guess I don't understand how that impacts the calendar.
Well, I'm talking about when you're saying remote learning, I'm talking about the kids that are restricted from coming in, like say because they have COVID or they have their quarantine.
Okay.
I'm talking specifically in that manner.
Sorry, I didn't follow that part of it.
Yeah, so no, I'm just talking about just consider different variations while, you know, the numbers are down, and then going into the second half of the school year, we've experienced the first half, and we've looked at things, ways of improvement, but why can't we take it a step further and being able to phase kids in if possible?
So, and I'll address a couple of those things because I think it's important, and I think they're worth talking about individually. The challenge with creating a core group of teachers is, by Iowa code, they have to be licensed in the subject that they're teaching. So we would have to have a math teacher at the high school. We would have to have, now it could be a 5-12 math teacher that would teach every grade 5 through 12, but that would be all that they do. So we would designate one teacher that's got a math endorsement that would do all of our remote learning for 5 through 12. We don't have the staff for that. I mean, we could add staff, but because of licensure,
Sure.
it just can't be like these 3 teachers are really good technology-wise, so let's have them. So that's a consideration, and we did talk about that. Is that what you were?
Not necessarily. I'm
Okay.
talking about the teachers themselves of that classroom would still collaborate with these remote teachers, with these core remote teachers that would be the go-to. Those classroom teachers would still be providing the lesson plan, like just passing over the lesson plan for the remote work, teachers to handle or to be the go-to person to provide that instruction.
Yeah, that.
Be the
can't do that.
background.
I mean,
Would
they
that
have
be
to
like
have the
Proctor?
content.
Excuse me?
Like Proctor in the class?
Well, I think we're bringing it back to high school each time when we're talking to the
It's fine.
kindergarten. When
Yeah.
you're talking to kindergarten teachers a
Yeah.
second ago, to me, that one could be applicable, correct? The one, what Cindy's talking about.
If we took one classroom teacher to create all the lessons,
Or something similar.
yeah, and we could, but then we'd have larger class sizes, which would deter us from having the 6 feet social. I mean,
Yep.
there's not a, I mean, is that the best way? Maybe, but I mean, some districts have just designated teachers that all they do is teach remotely.
Right.
We don't have the numbers to do that. You know, I mean, we just don't physically have enough staff to do that. And so that becomes a little tricky. We do have liaisons that we have this year that are the kind of the go-between between the family and the school or the teacher. And they can kind of monitor kids and how they're progressing and be in contact with the teacher, be in contact with the family. But to actually deliver the instruction, unless they are certified in that content area, they cannot do that.
Okay.
So that limits us in that regard. Now, that doesn't mean we couldn't look at, you know, if we wanted to add additional people to do that, but you'd have to add in each of the content areas, which makes it trickier. I will say, and maybe Mrs. Dutry can respond to this, but we did have, I would say at the beginning of maybe October or November, we had several parents that requested just being able to Zoom their kids in. And so our middle school team took that on and said, we're going to just Zoom, and every period that we go to, there'll be a Zoom session for science, there'll be a Zoom session for language arts, and you can tell me if I'm getting this wrong. You get a Zoom session for this, you get a Zoom session for that. Well, it started off and we had lots of kids, but by the second week, we didn't have any kids on the Zoom calls. The remote learner is quarantined or otherwise. So we made it an option, we made it available, but they just didn't take advantage of it.
Right, well, I'm just saying that, no, that shouldn't, if you're gonna say like this algebra class for this week, we're going through new material, it is required, it is not an option. The people that are in this classroom will be present, and then the people who are learning from home, whether it's remote, COVID, quarantine, sign on to learn for that particular class period. That wouldn't be an option, that's what I'm saying.
But, and I would contend that almost every day there's new learning. So it wouldn't be that you could just do it for this class on this day, because we instruct in it. I mean, there might be a day when you're catching up or reviewing or, you know, I mean, I don't know that there's a way to balance that, but it's worth, I mean, it's
Well,
worth
I think it
considering.
depends on the material. I mean, you know, I mean, it's language arts, maybe there's sometimes that it requires a virtual meeting, but otherwise, maybe that's something that Schoology will suffice.
Right.
I mean, I'm just trying to think outside the box,
Yeah.
trying to think of different ways as we manage through, because as Eddie said, we've all heard from I appreciate what the parents have come in and said, and we've heard a lot outside of this group too that feel like there's a lot of downtime, really, and it's perception too.
Sure.
And whether, we need to be more transparent somehow of breaking it out between elementary. Here's what's actually happening on a given day during this time. On Fridays, this is what's happening from 9 to noon, whatever. This is what they're doing, and then this is what the teachers are doing after that. Explain why from 10 to noon, why they're only available 10 to noon, and then what's happening with them afterwards. Because the perception is not only are there students not being provided enough learning experience, or it's considered more of independent study for most parents. So it's not, they feel like the remote learning is not getting through, and it depends on obviously what levels you're talking about,
Sure.
whether elementary, middle school, high school. But a lot of folks that have approached me feel like it's more independent study. We might as well enroll them all in college classes, because that's how college classes are presented, with very little instruction, except here's the information, you figure it out, you do the independent study. So again, it varies, but going back to maybe with middle school, then provide an explanation, being transparent of this is what happens during the school day. This is what the teachers are doing. This is what they're using the remainder of their time during the school day for. It's not like they're sitting around twiddling their thumbs.
Right.
And same with high school. So I think it would help, that we're just being very open in the communication and help folks understand. So.
People would read it?
I'm sorry?
Do you think people would read that, or that publication, or the video, or whatever we put out? I'm only on a...
I think if we put it out in snippets, I think if we have about 10-page letter, like for me personally too, in the workplace, I'll just briefly skim it. I won't even go through it. I think if we do it in snippet bullet points of per building, I think it'll go a long ways, and people can actually say, oh, okay, here's a one-pager, and then...
Are we able to track, because I know with the Return to Learn plan, you did the videos. Are we able to track what kind of response we got from that? I don't know.
Yeah, I think because we put those on YouTube, didn't we? We can see how many people viewed them.
On YouTube, you can see the number of views.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, because that's kind of breaking it down, because that's kind of
Facebook,
what...
you can see the number of people reached and stuff like that, but
Right.
just because you reach them doesn't mean they read the whole thing.
Right.
Watch the whole video, whatever.
So are there parents on the Return to Learn committee? Parent representatives?
Other than parents that
Other
are
than
going to
parent
district.
teachers?
Yeah. No, because we couldn't allow visitors in the building at the time.
Right. And then is this calendar change recommended by the Return to Learn committee?
We have not asked the Return to Learn committee. We got feedback from all the teachers, which are the Return to Learn committee, but
Right.
I did not specifically convene them.
And then,
Just to be completely transparent, I did not convene them when we made the recommendation in November either.
Yeah.
That was just something we saw a need for, and we, as an administrative team, we thought this might be a way to kind of meet those needs. So that's why we did that same process.
Yep. And why do we have to vote on the rest of the school calendar today, or is there a...
No, because Roger asked me that question today, and I did talk to Danielle about that, because I had asked if we look at changing the calendar, and my recommendation, and I'll tell you quite honestly, the only reason why I recommend through the end of the year is because I think it gives parents time to plan.
Yeah.
Think long term,
Right.
instead of, okay, at the end of this month, we're going to look at it again, and at the end. So that's the only reason why I suggested that we do it for the rest of the year. I think that it's merit to say, okay, at the end of March, do we look at it again and see where we are with our numbers? How is our return to learn, or our remote learning different now? Is it more effective? Is it less effective? Because I think, and I always have to remind myself this is the first time that our teachers have ever created remote learning. The first time. So when we talk about where are we now, as opposed to where we were in August, I think we're light years ahead. And I think as we, on our two snow days, virtual days last week, I asked the administrators to go through and get on every Schoology class, look at all the times there's new content, all the times that there's videos with our teachers on there, all the times when it's reinforcement of learning, just what are we seeing in our what we're asking kids to do on those virtual days. And as a result of that, as a result of talking to some of our students, we realized that we've got to have a little bit more structure in some of our classes so that they're easier to navigate, or so that there are common expectations that teachers are following. I don't think, from my perspective, I don't think it would have been fair to do that in August, right? Because we didn't know.
No.
We still don't know everything. And I'm being completely honest. We're making these decisions based on what we're seeing now. And I know that's not always great, but I'm telling you, in a pandemic, that's where I feel like we are a lot of times, right? Like, I'm looking at this right now saying, you know what, based on where we are with our teachers, what we're trying to do with remote learning, what we're trying to do in the classroom, what we're trying to do with give kids additional resources, this to me is the best option. Having said that, if you make a change to what the recommendation is, and it's like the date. So let's say you want to give it another month, and you want me to come back with more data to see are we more effective or less effective, and then decide again. We probably don't need to hold another hearing for that. But if you make a change to what we're recommending in the calendar, then we should hold another public hearing about that recommendation. So if we're talking about the timeline, Danielle doesn't think it'll be an issue as far as if you want to say March 31st to reevaluate it again, and then you can decide for the rest of the year, kind of go through the same process, hold another public hearing, look at the data. She doesn't think that would be a challenge, but if we're going to change the recommendation at all, then we need to hold another public hearing.
Because I found tonight to be extremely helpful. We heard it from the crowd that there was still some, I couldn't make it, or still didn't work for me. But those that made it, I think they understood. They went away with a better understanding of why. And it's probably more effective to have another public hearing, quite honest, than to put it out in whatever form, because our attention spans now are whatever words, Twitter, the headline, that's it. And I don't want the details, unless they're fed to me in a form. And so, I don't know.
So, my comments on all of this is, I'm not necessarily in favor of doing a short term. I know when we're talking about numbers, we don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. I mean, we just talked about how many kids we got quarantined right now or out, and if you listen to the White House at this point, they're saying the worst is yet to come. We could see things so who knows? Nobody can foresee that. But what I do know is if we move it a little bit, move the goalposts a little bit this time, and then we come back and look at it again, I don't know that we're giving our teachers a real good idea what their semester is going to look like. Or the families. And the messages that I got from, I think I've only heard from 3 parents. 2 of them are against us continuing. 1 of them was absolutely for us continuing with this. But I heard from probably 5 teachers who all said that their quality of life now, since we've had this calendar, is so much better. Because they can get their work done on those Fridays, they can do all those things that they normally would do, and then still have quality time at home, which is important. I think we can all agree on that, And when we talk about the new teachers, when I was in the high school office earlier, I was looking at the pictures. We have a lot of young teachers. When I visited with them early in the year, I asked them, well, how's this going with the remote learning? Some of them said it was really stressful. I mean, they took on a lot. They might be more comfortable with it now, but I'm sure that they appreciate that time to plan. And if you look at the results, they have more time with their students. They can connect with the students that need help, the remote learners, things like that. And I think that's important. So,
I guess I'd like to say that, all this discussion we've had, all the questioning we've had, everything like that, this has been unbelievable for me. Learned a lot through tonight, and I in no way wanted to feel or be construed as an attack on what our students have done, what our administration has done, and what we continue to do to react to what we're doing, because that's not the case, and that's not my intention, and it feels that way. I am in favor of a shorter term solution, and my reasoning is as we discussed earlier, we don't know what next year is going to bring. We could still be looking at some remote learning opportunities. At some point, this is going to become like the flu, and when people are out, they're just out and they're going to have to catch up, just like we did in the old days, I guess. But I don't want this year, and I know my precedent thing, nobody likes that term, but it's a perceived precedent of, okay, if we're going to have to do remote learning next year, we're going to have to go to the same calendar. And my goal is to continue to push to try to find solutions to get students into the classroom as much as we can, more than what they are now. I know that's not going to happen in the next month, but I'm optimistic that hopefully closer to the end of the year, we may have an opportunity, or at least continue to fight to have plans for the beginning of next school year. So that's why I would look for a shorter term option to really continue to drive the discussion and drive the looking for opportunities to get children in the classrooms. And I would say especially at the middle school level, that one is probably my bigger concern of them being out the entire day. On Fridays, I think there's a lot of struggles at that level. I've heard from a lot of parents. I've definitely heard from teachers too. I've heard from both sides. This is picking the less of two evils in my mind. It really is. That's my piece, I guess.
And I just have to say that I appreciate that, because I feel like I'm picking the lesser of two evils a lot. And I hate to say that, because we're talking about kids here, and that just it's so tough. But I have to say that I appreciate the time you were giving this, because as an administrative team, this has been on our plate since we recommended it the first time. What do we need for data? How are we going to say, is this justifiable? Because I talked to the team and I said, is this even worthwhile? Is this even a value add? And so I couldn't come to you and just say, oh, I think it's going well. That's not fair to our teachers, it's not fair to our kids, it's not fair to our community. So I do appreciate the time, I appreciate the public giving input, because I do think that this is a big ask. This is one that I wrestle with, just my philosophical view, those things. But I also know that this is unusual, and I don't know how to say it any other way. So I appreciate the feedback, and I never take it as an attack unless you're yelling at me and saying, I know you guys are
Not yet.
Yeah, I know. But I guess I speak for I think the administrative team, is that, I can't appreciate, you can tell you how much I appreciate the questions that are asked, because I would love for parents to contact me with questions. I'll respond to anybody who sends me questions. Because I'd like to clear up the information before it goes out, that this is what's happening, and this is why, and this is what. I've heard that 10 to 12. 10 to 12 is a time when teachers are dedicated to being available, but their work, I don't want them to schedule any collaboration meetings, I don't want them to schedule any time when they're working with a team, I don't want them to schedule any IEP meetings. That's when they're dedicated for that. But like you said, they're working the whole day. That's not even a question.
Right.
They're working the whole day and then some.
Right.
But I think that, did we say that to parents? No. We just wanted to make sure that there was a time dedicated for students, that they would definitely know that their teacher was there for responsiveness. And then most teachers are emailing back at the end of the day at dinner, and so I just, that's a perception thing that maybe we can work on, is what information do we get out there.
Yeah, that great feedback right there is, okay, we just need to say it in a different way.
Yeah.
They're available all day long, but dedicated in this
Yes.
period of
Yeah.
time.
Yes.
It's like,
But until we hear that from the parents, which we're
Right.
starting to hear more and more,
Yeah.
then we can get that feedback and we can get clearer and clearer and clearer with this communication.
But until it's an agenda item on the board packet, you don't hear anything, right? And then you
Right.
start getting the feedback. So it's good, it's a good feedback
Yeah.
mechanism.
Oh, yeah, it is.
My one last question would be, what would have to change, and this will help me frame it if it's a short-term or long-term, what would have to change between now and the end of the year for you to change your recommendation? And maybe I shouldn't put you on the spot like that, but
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation would be the whole year. I mean,
No, I
because
know.
we have to offer remote learning for the whole year.
Yep.
But if you said, let's do it until March 31st and reevaluate.
Yep.
If we didn't have any remote learners,
Okay.
if we, I
And
mean,
how
if we
many
didn't
do we
even
have
have
now?
that, we have 57, but then
57.
we have on average about 20 quarantined every week.
So about 80 kids.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, about 100 kids because you have 20 from this week and the 20 that
Oh,
we had last
that's
week.
over.
Because
Spread
it's a
out amongst all the
2-week period.
Okay.
Yeah, spread out
Which
amongst all the
is
grades.
not an insignificant part of our population.
No, an eighth.
100 kids out of 700 and...
Yeah, about an eighth.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so, I
Sorry.
mean, so that to me is the biggest piece of it. If we're gonna, and I think we have to still really look at the quality of what we're doing with remote learning. And I think our teachers want to. I mean, I don't think they want to put out bad products
No.
for kids. They want kids to learn. They want them to be engaged. If the teachers, if I send out a poll in March and I say, how's the balance going? Or do you have it kind of, are you in a groove? I can tell you probably what they're going to say just because I know what we're asking them to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to evaluate in March, I would like to know what data points you would like me to have.
Yep.
So we can evaluate it in a different way, in a different, mechanism. I don't know how you want to say it, but my recommendation would be the whole year.
Yep.
Or the rest of this year. I know Roger had asked me in the conversation that we had, would I recommend this for next year, even if we did remote? And my answer is probably not, no. Because we have a base. I mean, right now we're creating everything new. Next year we have a base. So if I have 2 days for 2 hours where I can have teachers evaluate that, improve it, modify it, change it, plus their time that they have for prep, that to me is manageable. Because they're not creating everything new. But they're creating everything new for this whole year.
Right.
And that's why I would make that recommendation. But I could easily say, okay, let's look at whatever date, February 28th, March 31st, whatever date you want to pick. But I'd like to know what it is you want me to have for that to help you understand kind of what conditions have changed. Because I don't see them changing. Even if we have a vaccine, we still have kids that are out. And that doesn't change. So that's why it's
We always
tricky.
have kids out.
Yeah, we do.
yeah.
But not at this rate.
Not at this rate,
typically.
I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
We're always gonna have some kids out.
Right.
Yeah, and typically not this long. I mean, you're out for 2 days because you have a cold, now you're out for 2 weeks because you can't come back.
So, I think we'll try to look at this in the frame of, we're going to have the same thing for 5 years. We're gonna remote learning for 5 years. How are we going to change our school to react to it? That's the thinking I think we gotta have now.
Right.
To be able to adapt, and that's what I'm hoping that we can continue to drive.
Right.
Because my concern is, going out at the end of the school year, we aren't going to be looking for that solution. And I really think we need to be looking for that solution. Because who knows what next year's gonna bring?
Right. And I'll just throw in, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay, go ahead.
I'll just throw in, because Steve and I have talked a lot about the Fly Fridays for our 9th through 12th graders. If what we're seeing in education and the kind of the drive from the governor is going to go into effect, which who knows, right? I mean, it's all right now really in the hands of, I think, the constituents, who's contacting their representatives and what are they telling them. But I think that this, and the first time we met as a Return to Learn team, I said, this is our time to really think about what we do in education that we're not happy with and make it better. I mean, I know that we've got a lot to do before we get there, but that's kind of how I want you to think about this. So when we came up with the Fly Fridays for our 9 through 12, the intent is that if we can shape those into being days when kids can have CNA experiences at nursing homes, where they can go for a day and work with somebody, they can go on a job or an internship every Friday, where they can go to Des Moines, where they don't have to drive for a half hour to work for a half hour and then come back. If we can do some of that stuff where we're a little bit more innovative in what we're offering kids, and the availability, the flexibility to do that, then I think that's a good thing. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, is how are we looking at where our deficits are, like MTSS, and building capacity for them beyond this year, remote learning. How are we building capacity for that beyond this year if we need to do it beyond this year? And that's a conversation we have every week in our admin meeting. And I'm being quite honest, we talk about those things every single week that we meet. And I think that when I gave you that document that had all of the kind of the different models and changes that we had, I kind of tried to give you a reason, the why behind it. And what, is this something that we'll see next year or the year after or the year after? And some of the things that I think we've put in place, that common time for teachers, that to me is significant. And I'll advocate for that. But it's not really a change because most kids have a study hall anyway. You know, so it's not like we really changed their schedule, we just changed when they could have it. We still have an option for kids who want that 8th period, it's just remote. You know, they can still come in for support. So I think we are doing some of that. Maybe we're not, I hate to put that out yet though, because we don't know. And so I'm fearful if we start to advocate or, you know, advertise some of that to inform public, and we're not there yet, if we have to change it, then what happens? And so that's why finding that balance of how much do you put out, how much do you plan ahead when we don't know yet is really tricky. But I think some of the things we're doing, and administrators, you guys can jump in too, I think we're putting ourselves in a position to do that through some of the things we're talking about. The Fridays and the half a day for collaboration, to me is this year. I mean, I don't see it beyond that. Principals, based on feedback from teachers.
No, I would agree with you. I think some of it is going to be driven by what are the expectations for remote learning beyond this year, because there's got to be a balance there somewhere, and for right now, that provides the support for that balance. Depending on what that expectation is next year, maybe we have a conversation of using a different vehicle to drive that remote learning. But I mean, beyond this year, no, I don't see that as a need. But again, I'm not in the classroom every day, so I say that without having any other high school teachers in here to give me their 2 cents.
I would say the same thing. It's really what's that expectation ongoing for the remote. Some of the biggest feedback I got from teachers regarding the Fridays was revolved around sustainability, quality of life, healthy balance, morale, and just being able to find that balance of doing the in-person and the remote. As was mentioned before, as that base is built, the amount of new content that has to go into it will decrease, and so some of that time requirement will decrease. There'll still be some time needed to be set aside if that remote expectation is still there, but it wouldn't have to be as big of a chunk. And I think if this was a multi-year deal every year between comfort level and that base being built, that number will continually decrease but never be zero.
But then I have to think that we have to ask ourselves, what's our end goal? Is it to try to phase kids back into the classroom? You know, thinking at least through the end of this year and into next year. We don't know what the situation's going to be. So going back to what Roger's saying, you know, we could look at this as a 5-year pandemic. I mean, do we continue the same path of looking at remote? I mean, I think one will be adjusted depending on the other. You know, if we're looking at a phased in look of having kids coming back, you've got more kids then coming back and less kids on remote, so that's going to adjust how much you're going to need to do on the remote learning side.
Well,
but then we've also compounded the work that is necessary on the remote learning side because we're not thinking of phasing in the kids back to school either. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And to that point, as I think about these things as we move towards vaccination and people being vaccinated. I think once we have a high vaccination point, I'm not a doctor, I'm not going to tell you I understand how this works. But my impression would be, just like the flu vaccination, the quarantine time or the time they're at home would probably be diminishing. And so the remote learning might not be as big of a thing. I don't know. But to the point of what we do for the rest of the year, I hope our reality changes.
But if we're comfortable in having the middle school kids switching classrooms back to where they were, then we must feel pretty confident about having kids being back in the school and going back to some sort of routine.
But they
right? Because otherwise, why would?
In school. They have been in a routine. We're talking
right?
about
No,
taking.
But before we weren't moving the middle school kids. They were just to
Right.
stay in the same classroom.
Right.
But now, as of last week, we're having them switch classes again.
Right.
So there must be some sort of comfort level.
Right.
That I'm just saying it goes towards adjustment too. Every step we take, I'm just trying to have us consider adjusting as we go, tweaking it more as we go, and trying to phase in as much as possible. It's just ideas that I think we should consider.
Can I ask a question real quick, Sharon? We haven't addressed custodial and sanitizing of the building, which was partly Friday. Is that happening at a level that they still need that time? Is it?
Yeah, anytime we can get in a deep clean, it helps. The advantage that we've had is we've had some associates that want to continue to work for the whole day. So typically associates work while students are in the building. So we've had some associates that have stayed on for the 3 hours, and they actually they do some of that work. I mean, people are just stepping up, but that helps them get their hours. But we also get additional resources to help with some of that. So when I asked Rick about it, he said it's huge, right? I mean, they'll work with whatever we give them. But he said that's a real value add. But he said if we have to change it, we have to change it and we'll adjust. So, and I think that's the way our teachers are. I think, they'll adjust. I can't speak highly enough about that.
I have a question. If we shorten the time and look at it again in March, we still have spring break, right? In our calendar?
Yes.
So then, if people are gone and come back, we could see numbers going, potentially going up by the end of March then,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So, I don't know that it's good to shorten that, I guess, because we're gonna have some of that, but again, that's some of the things, because, like the universities all did away with, or most of them did away with spring break, and they're just starting now. So, I worry about that then too, I guess, with that timing, because we're gonna have a week less of school to be looking at numbers for that, and so I guess I'm thinking that it's better, we heard with Becky saying, this is like her first year of teaching all over again. And I think, with someone with that kind of experience to be able to teach children, but then again, like we've said, having to learn a whole new skill set in order to do that. And it just, I think we have to balance, just like when we talked about requiring masks before school started. It's not just about the kids, we've got to protect our workers too. And so that's why I think we've got to do whatever we can to keep the teachers so that they do feel like they have the time to do what they need to do and what they're being asked to do this year. So I think doing it through the end of the year makes sense to me, I guess.
All right. Is there any other discussion or questions? Will, do you have anything to add?
No, sir.
Can I just tell one more thing? I can talk about this all night, and I won't. But I will, thank you, Mr. Tessa. I will tell you that I went in and talked with a middle school teacher today. I'm helping in an 8th grade English language arts classroom. I'm co-teaching for a couple of weeks. And I went in and talked to a different teacher today, and I was just brainstorming, and she said, you know, the thing that frustrates me the most about remote learning is that there seems to be, you know, some frustration on the kids' part about how things are organized, and on our part about how kids are using Schoology. And I said, so is that because they don't know how to use it? Is it because they don't, you know, that we don't have a common kind of expectation for even kids to use it? Not just teachers, but also kids. So if kids can't navigate that system on their own to be highly effective in a remote environment, then that's on us, right? I mean, we have to instruct them how to do that. So we talked about, did Sue come and talk to you? So one of our ideas, and this is the thing that I think people really need to understand, is we come up with ideas all the time about how to make this better. Like we are literally every day coming in and saying, what if we try, or what if we do? So the idea was, what if we have expectations where we have all of our teachers in advisory working through skill sets on how to use Schoology that kids have to demonstrate proficiency on. And if they're not there, then that's one of the reasons why they come in on Fridays, so that we can make sure they are able to be highly effective in remote learning. Because if they're not able to function in that world at a high level, there's probably high levels of frustration. But if we're not teaching them explicitly how to do that and what those expectations are, how would we expect that they know that? So again, this is kind of how the process is going. I don't know where the conversation went. I said, that sounds like a great project for the middle school to pilot. But that's kind of how this works, is that we're kind of evolving as we go through this too. And I just appreciate that our staff does that. I mean, it makes it a good place to be, even though there's lots going on. But I just thought I would share that, because this is not ever just in a vacuum and we just talk about this. We're looking at ways to make all of what we do better all the time. And a lot of that comes from our teachers, because they're doing it every day.
Okay. We are still on the school calendar. We need a motion and a second to take action on this issue.
I'll move to approve the recommended changes to the current academic calendar through March 1st of this year.
So can I clarify quick?
Yes, definitely.
We won't have so we're going to take this up at the February board meeting then?
Yeah.
Okay, so this month we'll do it in the 23rd or 24th? But I don't remember, 22nd.
That sounds right.
22nd, okay.
Can I ask a question? Could we take, like, I guess if we approve the changes as suggested till the end of the year, can we change that recommendation in between now and then if we see something change?
Sure.
Okay, so it's not,
Yeah.
it's this, even if we approve the calendar now as presented till the end of the year,
Yeah.
we can make a change.
Oh, yeah, we just hold a public
Anytime
hearing
in there.
and change it
Okay.
back, yeah.
But we won't
But what
give
Roger's-
public hearing or public feedback throughout there unless we did make that decision to have that public hearing.
So the public hearing is a one-time deal then it locks it in?
No, because if we
can't
were
change
going to go back and say, okay, we're going to go back and make Fridays be an all-day for all kids, and let's say through 8th grade, we have to hold another public hearing. You can't just revert back without a public hearing. Anytime you make a change to the academic calendar, you have to hold a public hearing.
Okay, so if we decided to then change it from long-term solution to, oh my gosh, this happened, we'd still need a public hearing.
Correct.
So either way, we need a public hearing.
Correct.
Okay.
So,
I mean, if you, let me make sure I'm clarifying this.
Yeah.
If you make the recommendation that we go through the whole year, and then after March 23rd, whenever our meeting is in March, we decide that we want to go back because of, for whatever reason, we'd have to have a public hearing to change the calendar back. You can't just, I mean, even though we put it in place based on a public hearing, once we put this in place, any changes we make to the calendar have to go through another public hearing.
Okay. Thank you.
So what Roger's recommending is just to,
Continue for this month and have this same conversation in February.
so it's not to approve it for the rest of the year.
That's what's on the table right now, if I'm reading you correctly.
But we'll revisit this at the next week.
Okay. And I second that.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we, can you read that back exactly?
Can I just look and see what the Friday is that we're talking about so that I get it specific? Let me look
March.
at my calendar.
March 1st will be Monday.
March 1st is Monday.
So it would be either, so I'm just gonna throw it out there.
Yes.
If we do the meeting on the 22nd, that's when our board meeting is, we're making a decision about the 26th. So we're talking about that same week. So if you, I would say a recommendation might be to go through March 5th and then have the conversation on the 22nd.
And the March board meeting is on the 22nd?
No, the February, we'd have to have the conversation.
The March
February.
board meeting is on the 22nd, is that?
Correct, both of them are, February and March.
Okay.
Say
I
that
will
again. I'm sorry, I missed that.
I will read this back.
Okay.
My motion is to approve the recommended changes to the current academic calendar through March 26th of 2021. So that is after the March board meeting. Not
Okay.
February.
So you moved it?
I moved it back 1 month.
1 month.
Yes.
So March 22nd, board meeting will have the conversation,
Would have a
if or
public-
not, if we decide we don't want to have it, we don't even put it on the agenda, and it just falls away and we go back to the regular calendar. So you're making the recommended changes that we go through March 26th, Friday, March 26th.
So basically 2 months out, have an opportunity to revisit it if we want to extend it longer. That's what I'm proposing. That's what my motion is.
All right. So it's been properly moved that we move the calendar through March 26th. Is there a second? Because I took that as a rescinding of the previous one.
Yeah, this is the new motion, I guess.
So this is what you're wanting to keep the middle school in with the Fridays?
Well, we
Is that
can't
it?
really change that.
Oh.
The only thing we can change is the date.
Correct.
At this point.
Yeah, if you change the middle school, then we have to have another public hearing.
Yep.
Okay.
At this point, it would be exactly like we have it right now until March 26th.
Is there a second? Ted, do I need to ask for a second 3 times? No, I think I do. Is there a second? Is there a second? The motion dies due to no second.
No second.
Does anybody else have another motion to make on this issue?
I motion to vote the approved recommended changes to the academic calendar, to the current academic calendar as presented. So that's through the school year.
Is there a second to the motion on the floor?
I would second that.
It has been properly moved and seconded that we accept the recommended changes to the current academic calendar. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
So we have Cindy and Roger. Nays.
Okay. Thank you, guys. That was a good discussion. I appreciate everybody's thoughtfulness on it.
No doubt.
All right, temporary COVID leave policy.
So at the end of December, the leave policy for staff expired with the first round of kind of CARES money, or the CARES Act. What it allowed for was employees that couldn't be here either because they tested positive or because they had to quarantine, or if they were taking care of a family member. So some of those kind of exceptional leaves as a result of COVID, the government allowed employees 80 hours of leave to take care of that. When they renewed the CARES Act the second time, they did not leave that provision in. I met with the Labor Management Committee, and overwhelmingly, the support is that we continue that through this current school year. We would not include the FMLA portion of it, and so that's not included in this temporary leave policy because we didn't have anybody take advantage of it, so it didn't make sense. And they can always take FMLA for other reasons. But I would ask that this, so when I visited with, I talked to Danielle a lot about this stuff, but when I visited with Danielle about this, she recommended that we put it in a policy and then have in there that if we have any new legislation that supersedes this, then that goes into effect. Because there's been conversation that we'll have a new policy that'll take care of different kinds of leave. And so she said to protect us and our interest as a district, we wanted to have a policy in writing of what it would be, and then anything that came out federal level, state level that would supersede it, then this would fall off in essence or become null in the process of doing that. So that's why this is in the policy form. It reads almost exactly the same with the exception of taking a couple of things out because they didn't apply. I'm recommending that we approve this. I think when I asked Ted maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had about 12 staff members that had taken advantage of it or had used it. I wouldn't say taken advantage of it, but had a need for it.
So this is the 80 hours is what
Yes,
we're talking
this is
about.
the 80 hours, yeah.
That makes sense. And those 80 hours can be used for dependents or themselves, is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Now, we did stipulate, and I will tell you, that this is contingent on the employees. Let's say it's me. Let's say I am showing symptoms. I have 2 symptoms, which means that I have to go home, according to public health guidelines, but I refuse to get a test. Okay? Then I don't get the leave because I don't know that it's COVID or not. I'm just choosing not to, but I still can't come back to work for 10 days because of public health guidelines. So they would have to take sick leave in that case. Now, most of our staff go and get tested and then we find out yes or no. But if they've come into close contact, whatever. So we work through it all. But this only applies if they work through the process of identifying if they have COVID or not. They can't just say, oh, I'm feeling ill and have 2 symptoms, a headache and a runny nose, and then be gone for 10 days and use COVID. They have to actively be looking for health professional verifying that so that we know it is COVID related. Otherwise, they just use their sick leave.
Is there any questions for Sharon on this?
And can I back up one more time?
Absolutely.
Stop selling, you already sold us.
No, I want to make sure we can retro it back to the December 31st time. Then we can put the leaves in of the few that have needed it in that time period. Because I don't want them to have to use their sick time for this if we approve this. So I would like to have it be January when the other one expired from there on. I mean, right now that's in there as their sick leave, but I'd like to attribute it to COVID leave if we can.
So instead of January 25th, it'll say this policy shall be effective February 1st and expire on June 30th. And then we will grant anyone COVID leave between January 1st through February 1st.
Correct.
Just to change that.
Just to change
the way it's worded.
The way it's worded, because I did not go back and change it when we changed the date from last. So I just wanted to clarify that.
All right, this does require a motion and a second with the following vote to approve.
Yeah, I'd make a motion to approve the COVID leave policy retroactively to January 1st. Did I get that, Ted?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll second that. Been properly moved and seconded that we approve the COVID leave retroactive to January 1st. All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Early Childhood Center grant opportunities.
So, Iowa Workforce Development put out a matching grant opportunity up to $100,000 to expand, remodel, build daycare programs in the state. We're seeing an increase in our number of kids in daycare, which is great. So what I would like to consider is right now our daycare is on the southeast side of the building, and conveniently above our 2 daycare classrooms is what I affectionately call our snow fence, which is a brick wall that's there for aesthetics. It doesn't structurally serve a purpose, but we have to actually go up and shovel the snow off because it melts and comes down into our classrooms. And so I would like, I asked Rick to get me a bid on what it would take to remove that and then to do the roof work so that we don't have that issue anymore. So he is in the process of getting that. It would have to be a match from us, which I think is well worth it when we look at the damage and the fixing and the time it takes to shovel that. So I have one of our grant writers who's willing to write this. It is quick turnaround time. I don't know that we'll get it, but I would like to, it would be probably a substantial cost, you know, I don't know how much, but not more than $100,000 because that's all the grant's for, but I do think it's a need in that area to kind of remodel what we currently have to make it more functioning for kids.
You had me at Grant.
Okay.
Yeah, right?
No.
Perfect.
I mean, I looked at that with Rick, it's gonna be spendy to get that done, so
Yeah.
any grant money definitely.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And there's no good fix.
Yeah.
It's an architectural error.
That makes me smile from someone who's in the industry.
Well, I like how you followed up with no doubt.
No doubt.
I just know that wasn't part of our monies for PEPL and for SAVE, but I do think if we can get this and knock the cost down at least in half, I think it's well worth looking at allocating money to make sure we can do that.
It's a problem that's not going away,
Right.
so we got to do some point.
Who climbs up there to shovel the snow?
Don Bedwell?
So he's gonna want this.
Oh, and I think there's several people that would want this, but yes.
All right. So that was for information?
Yeah, for information only. I'll bring it to you if we get approved, and, I mean, we have it on our facilities plan for eventual, but it's just not priority right now, but if we get this, I think we need to move it up to priority.
All right, and the last thing on the agenda is the Healthy Initiative.
So this came from our insurance committee meeting, and I somehow got volunteered. I don't know why. Maybe it's my blood pressure. But our insurance group, Mark Becker and Associates, our consultants for our insurance, brought this to us, and I included the information for you. And it's about finding strategies. It's a year-long program, finding strategies to have staff, people who are insured, be better. I know a lot of it's being proactive, but the idea is meaningful weight loss, lower stress, better sleep, all those things that we want for ourselves, for our staff. And so the way that this program works is you enroll a number of people, however many it is that your budget can afford. They say about a 40% success rate. So let's say we have 10 people enroll and 4 are successful. If they are successful and meet the matrix, then it's close to a $600 payment that we would have to the company as a district. Per person, yes. And so it kind of take that for what it's worth. I am, of course, biased because I think this is extremely important. and I would support this 100%, but I also know that this is district money that we could be using for other things. So I also think about, okay, somebody being out of the building for 2 days costs the district, or 3 days costs the district about that much money. So if we can get somebody healthy so that they're in the building more, is it worth it in the, you know what I mean? Does it come out in the wash? And I don't know that there's a great answer for that, but I do want it to be considered. We don't have to sign up now, but I would like to bring it up maybe next month as you guys have time to look through it and see if it's something that you would consider supporting, because it is a different allocation of funds than what we typically think of for educational purposes.
So if they're not successful, the cost is nothing?
The cost is nothing.
Wow.
Can I throw out something? Our company does something like this. It's called a wellness program, and it actually employees, they go get their biometrics like blood pressure, do some blood work and everything like that, and they answer about 10 questions, and the lab work is then evaluated, and once they satisfy certain parameters, if they have a, I don't know what you call a passing score of some sort, then they'll get $500 into their HSA.
No. So an additional incentive.
Yeah, because it's them doing, trying to make themselves better. So the benefit is given directly to them. So it's just something to pass on and maybe consider.
Is there anything by doing this that we get better rates as far as the insurance? Or the insurance
Not
committee
that I know of. Just, I mean,
it would
cost,
eventually
experience, right? So that's the longer term.
Because I know what we do is, if you do all that, and even if you're not in the great rates or great scores, just by doing that, you get a better rate on your insurance. I mean,
and I've seen
lower
programs
costs.
like that. We didn't even talk about something.
Yeah,
like
so
that.
that's what I did.
If they know that we're actually doing it.
Right.
And it's somebody slim or without all those risk factors, they wouldn't enroll. It would have to be somebody that met those qualifications, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're already in every healthy category,
right? So
then
you wouldn't have that many.
You wouldn't be able to apply.
Right. So it's a positive.
So I'd just like you to consider it because, like I said, it is a different allocation of funds.
So we would limit the number of people that we would allow it?
Yeah, just because let's say everybody was successful,
Yeah,
I mean, I think we just have to have, I mean, I think we just have to say, okay, we'll allocate $2,000 a year for this, and if we think 5 people can be successful with it, then that's, you know what I mean? I think we just have to, or we just say, we'll do everybody that wants to do it, but then we might have to pay out a chunk of money. I mean,
I think the pilot's a good idea. See if people even want to do it.
yeah. I anticipate there would be a lot of interest just based on what we did last year with the health initiative. I don't know that I think a lot of people are there now. Like they want to be doing better just because the pandemic has taken a toll, but I could be wrong. Yeah.
Sounds like a treadmill the other morning.
Is there any other questions or comments about health initiative? Not hearing any, that brings us to the end of the agenda. The next meeting is scheduled for Monday, February 22nd at 6 p.m. here in the Media Center. Do they have anything else? Not hearing anything else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second that. And properly moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We're now adjourned.